Enter your attendee ID number followed by pound. If you do not know your attendee number.
Hi, Lynn. This is Mark Rawlings. Just make sure I'm working.
Hey, thanks. You're live and loud and clear.
Outstanding. Good morning, everyone.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, it's 10:30. I think we have about 31 participants, including staff. And I'm looking to see if we have a number of our WMATA panelists as well. So you should feel free to get started, Mr. Collins.
First off, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our planning session. My name is Ruben Collins. I'm chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and this special work session is now called to order. As you know, this is an all virtual meeting today, and I trust the audio and video connections are working well for all of you. Please call, email, or text staff if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. You should also have the contact information in the email we received from Conti last week. We will continue to live stream the audio and video of this meeting on TPB's YouTube channel. Staff will also record attendance of those participating today. If your name is not displayed in the web conferencing software, please send staff an email with your name and jurisdiction to report your attendance. To recap our reason for convening this morning, in November 2022, the TPB was briefed on the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority's Better Bus effort. Better Bus seeks to advance regional priorities through an improved bus system, including a bus network redesign, bus priority measures, bus stop and shelter improvements, and a transition to zero-emission vehicles. This work session was requested as a follow-up to continue the conversation on what the TPB can do to aid the Better Bus effort. This session will start with an overview by TPB staff of bus transit in the region. They will be followed by Alan Fry, Programs and Policy Director at the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, with their perspective on busing in the region. Then the main part of the work session will take place. 3 key topics will be introduced by WMATA staff members, followed by time for discussion on each. For each item on the agenda, I will ask the presenter to complete their briefing. Then I will entertain questions from members, in turn by jurisdiction. Please use the raised hand icon if you wish to speak, and staff will call out your names. We hope to wrap everything up by 11:45 to give everyone an opportunity to prepare for the actual TPB meeting. So before I turn this over to Conti to start the presentations, just a friendly reminder to please mute your microphones and to unmute and state your name when you begin to speak. So with all that stated, let's begin the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are now on to the agenda item number 2, just an overview from the TPB staff. So this work session is part of the comprehensive approach to develop a better long-range transportation plan. So creating a better long-range transportation plan will be made possible by being intentional about implementing projects, programs, and policies that will advance multiple planning priorities and goals adopted by the TPB. With the projects, programs, and policies being informed by the findings of the various scenario analysis that the TPB has conducted over the past 10 years. Bettering bus service in our region is an idea or an initiative, if you will, that does exactly that. And there has been a number of scenario studies that the TPB has done on that. A better bus system with service that matches the travel patterns and needs of our residents with fares that are equitable and affordable will require close cooperation by the transit operators, the entities that own and maintain the roadways, the traffic signals, the bus stops, and by policymakers who help set the fares and the funds to operate the service. By making a change and by helping people make a change to their preference on how they travel, whether it's for work or non-work purposes. So this work session is the TPB's attempt to escalate this collaboration between the many stakeholders from the staff levels to those of the decision makers. So from the staff's perspective, the expectation for today's sessions are: one, putting the three specific topics that Chair Collins mentioned that can make bus service better on the radar of the TPB board members so that they can champion action within their own jurisdictions to take actions that would better the bus system. And two, to see how the TPB can assist its members take such actions. So those are the two broad expectations for today's session. With that, I will hand over the staff facilitation of the session to Eric Randall to provide an overview of transit in National Capital Region and the work that the TPB has done, and then we will delve in to the three specific topics. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to just set up the context for today's discussion. Eric?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We'll be bringing up a quick presentation under item 2. Again, all meeting materials are posted on the work session on MWCOG TPB in case you need it. So Kim, there we go. Thanks, everyone. I'll just speak briefly to remind everyone of what we're doing here today before turning it over to our speakers today. Next slide, please. So again, here's a recap of our schedule for today. We've done welcome and introduction, and this is the TPB overview. I'll be followed by Alan Five from the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and then Metro staff will lead the discussion on the 3 key better bus topics with a few slides on each. And at that point, we'll have discussion, and then we'll wrap up this morning's session. Next slide, please. Just to remind everyone about transit systems in the National Capital Region. We have a wealth of them. Besides Metro Rail, run by WMATA, we have our 2 commuter rail systems, MARC and VRE. We have DC Streetcar, and we have 12 local and commuter bus operators based in the region, as well as others that operate in and out of our region. Many of the jurisdictions and those transit systems are either interfacing with the Metro Better Bus effort, or re-examining their own transit networks. This is a continuing effort by all involved. Next slide, please. Just remind everyone that the TPB does do a lot of activities in support of transit. Again, transit is part of our long-range plan and our transportation improvement program, the 2 critical pieces that get federal funding for the region. We host the Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee that meets monthly to discuss regional transit issues with the operators and planners. We have an annual State of Public Transportation report. We do one-off reports like an equity white paper that was briefed to the board last fall, a bus lane enforcement study. We have ongoing programs like Transit Within Reach and Transportation Land Use Connections. It's actually going to be taken up by the board this afternoon for the latest iteration, all promoting small-scale transit studies. And we do a lot of data and traffic analysis that help planners as they plan for transit in the region. Next slide, please. I want to take a step back and just remind everyone that climate is certainly at the top of our agenda these days at the TPB. Resolution passed last June set new goals for transportation sector specific greenhouse gas reduction. And in that resolution, the board approved a number of reduction strategies. I'm highlighting 2 of them here today. Number 3, which is convert public transit buses to clean fuels by 2030. And number 6, reduce travel times on all public transportation bus services. If we are to meet our climate goals as a region, we need to work towards adopting these transit improvements. And again, that's what a lot of our discussion will be about today. Next slide, please. Just to recap, besides our existing transit system, we do have a lot of transit projects planned in the region. The Purple Line in Maryland is under construction. There are bus rapid transit, BRT projects and transit ways planned or in progress in Montgomery County, in Virginia with Metroway and the US 1 Richmond Highway project. In DC, they have the K Street Transitway. We also have a lot of improvements for commuter rail in the long range plan to MARC and VRE service improvements, building that new Long Bridge rail track across the Potomac, additional tracks in Virginia, the MARC Cornerstone Plan, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority plans. Next slide, please. But bus will complement all those projects that are in the plan, and Metro will speak more, but they have the Better Bus effort that you were briefed about back in November. And again, there are links available to that. We'll be speaking to 3 of the elements today, all working to improve local bus transit in the region. Next slide, please. Besides the efforts by Metro, I want to emphasize Ride On Reimagined Montgomery County, which again is our second largest bus system with close to 400 buses, is doing their own network review. Other transit agencies are also in the middle of reviews, including PRTC's OmniRide and Frederick City and County working with their transit system. I should also mention Alexandria Dash completed a whole network reevaluation in 2021 and implemented that, which is an Alexandrian I get to enjoy every week. Next slide, please. So a lot of work is being done on bus. Again, Metro is going to cover these 3 topics today: bus prioritization, making buses faster; bus stops and station improvement, improving the attractiveness of bus to customers; and zero emissions bus, working towards their greenhouse gas emissions goals. Next slide, please. So the 4 questions today, and this is what Metro staff will be covering. What is the problem? What is the challenge? What are we trying to solve? What actions is Metro taking with Better Bus, or indeed other agencies that are continuously re-examining their own bus service? What are the challenges and barriers to success? What can TPB, again as TPB staff and TPB members, do to help us address these problems and meet our regional goals for transit? So next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. Again, we'll wrap up at the end of the session, and there will also be a quick recap of this morning's work session at the board this afternoon. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll conclude my remarks, and Alan Fye will be the next speaker.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next speaker. This is Alan. Is it Alan Fye?
It is Alan Fye. Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Waiting for the slides to come up, and then we'll jump right in. All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chair and TPB for inviting MVTC to come over and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing over here in Northern Virginia. We've got a couple slides we're going to run through really quickly to talk about how we're approaching better bus service here in Northern Virginia and how that fits into the larger regional contact of Metro and then the greater DMV area. So next slide, please. All right, just to give a little bit of context for folks that may not be as familiar with the transit network here in Northern Virginia, we're a pretty comprehensive network. There's a significant amount of local and regional bus services provided. You can see on the map there, it's pretty extensive. We have 7 different bus operators, including Metro Bus, a significant rail network, obviously commuter rail we talked about a little bit earlier. There's a couple of really, really exciting stats on the right-hand side, but I think part of this is really understanding the geographic and the political stretch of transit service here in Northern Virginia and how all this does tie into, like Eric mentioned a little bit earlier, all those greenhouse gas emission goals that we have, the climate goals that we have, and the work that we're doing here to help us meet that and provide mobility for our constituents here in Northern Virginia. Next slide. So a little bit of a step back. There's a little bit of work that MUTC is working on right now. We're doing a regional bus analysis. And what I'll do over the next couple slides is kind of explain how this is tying in with the work that Metro is doing, the better bus work they're doing, and also some of the more detailed projects they have moving on. So Northern Virginia's regional bus analysis, there's 6 bus providers here in Virginia. A little bit of background, we're all required to provide transit strategic plans to the Commonwealth. It's a really important document that's updated on a regular basis to make sure that, we work closely with the state on different criteria, making sure we're tracking what's out there, and also making folks eligible for Commonwealth funding. When we were approached a couple years or so back by the Department of Rail and Public Transportation here in Virginia and asked a question, it's like, we have these individual strategic plans. What about doing a regional strategic plan? Stepping back and going beyond the political borders, going beyond what's done on a day-to-day basis at each of the individual jurisdictions, kind of look at it more regional. And that's for folks that aren't familiar with MVTC, that's one of our key roles here, is making sure that we're looking at things in a regional perspective here in Northern Virginia. So taking those 6 strategic plans, how do we look at it a little bit higher level? Next slide. So in that context of looking at these individual plans and then looking at it from the Northern Virginia point of view, we also have to remember we're part of a greater transportation network and a greater transit network that spreads beyond Northern Virginia. So the work that we're doing here in Northern Virginia is complementary to the work that folks in Metro are doing. Before and as we were getting our project up and running, we made sure that we worked really closely with Allison, I think you'll hear from her shortly, and her team to make sure the scope of work that we're looking at is complementary. So we're not duplicating anything and making sure that we're all working together and moving towards the same goals. So a couple of the differences here that we want to point out is our geography is a little bit different. Obviously, Northern Virginia versus the entire metro region. Transit operators, Metro is focused on Metro bus, and we have 6 different operators here in Northern Virginia. The type of analysis that we're working on, ours is looking a little more of a macro level. Metro is diving into the route by route, line by line type of transit planning. And then also the time frame. Metro is looking at something a little bit shorter term. Ours goes out to at least 10 years, looking at that longer term needs and different things like that. And I think I can't overemphasize the work that we do with all of our colleagues here, TPB, Metro, all the jurisdictions, is that regional coordination element. It's one thing that MVTC does very well. I think TPB does very well. We're both great conveners within our respective areas, getting folks to work together closely on those scopes of work, making sure that we're involved in each of our neighboring jurisdictions. They're doing a project on technical advisory committees, things like that. So there's a couple of those differences. I think hopefully that helps explain how the 2 elements of what the work that we're doing and Metro is doing are complementary to each other. Next slide. So this just goes in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to read everything that's on there. Looking at their strategic plans that we in Northern Virginia are required to do by the Commonwealth. We dig a little bit deeper into what service we have now, planned services. There's a lot of asset maintenance and tracking that goes in there. And obviously one of the most important things, the financial needs. I think we're going to see those conversations continue. Transit in general, there's been a lot of talk recently about financial needs of Metro, larger discussion for the region. So part of the work that we're doing here, at least on the bus side, is focusing what are those financial needs from a very local, then a regional, and then a much larger regional perspective. Next slide. And also some of the things we're looking at from our point of view is what are the opportunities for the future? And this is looking at all of the providers that are here in Northern Virginia, and that includes Metrobus. A couple of different things like time of day, the day of the week, what are the service planned now, what is there in the future? Where there's service gaps, as we all have probably heard and read multiple times over the last several months, or several years actually, is COVID changed everything. COVID changed the travel patterns from 2020 to 2023. And I don't think we really know quite yet where those patterns are going to settle. They're still evolving. And I think transit has a very challenging job, an exciting job at the same time to keep adapting as we have during COVID to make sure that transit is providing that need and providing those services for our riders. Some of the other things we're looking at are potentially gaps is like, are there corridors out there that we're not serving today? High capacity corridors, I think there's a lot of work here in the Northern Virginia space, both at MVTC and MVTA, looking at some of those corridors where there are opportunities for higher capacity transit, whether it's express bus rapid transit, things like that, opportunities across those jurisdictional boundaries. We all know that riders and commuters and transportation is not bound by the political boundaries we have on a map. It's a much larger network that transcends that, and making sure that we try to help remove those barriers and make sure we're all moving in the same direction to make sure folks have that mobility they need. Last part of this is basically looking at where can we share resources? As you know, Northern Virginia, a big chunk of it is pretty constrained when it comes to land use. So are there opportunities for us to share facilities when it comes to fuel, maintenance, offices, logistics, things like that? Zero emission bus, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later with Metro, is like that infrastructure. Where is it going? What is that going to do when it comes to the short, medium, and long-term part of planning, the rollout of that? So what are those opportunities that as a region we can work together, both in Northern Virginia and then with the greater region overall? So that's a kind of an overview of kind of the work that we're doing to try to push forward, making sure that we have a really, really good grasp of what bus planning is in Northern Virginia and the opportunities to keep moving forward. And I've got one more slide. This talks a little bit about some of the other work that we're doing, and this all kind of overlaps. This is some of the other really, really big MVTC efforts. We're doing some zero emission strategic planning here in Northern Virginia, working very closely with TPB and Metro. As we talked about the transit and the elements, you know, there is a big part of that funding picture that we're going to have a lot of really hard questions going forward. Actually, tonight at one of our committee meetings, we're going to have some preliminary results on some work we've been doing about Northern Virginia's economic value to Virginia and see where that conversation goes. Also, we touched on a couple other different areas here, reduced fare, fare-free, equity concerns. We're working on rolling out some BRT development on the Route 7 corridor here, working closely with all of our partners here. And we do a lot of research in the WMATA funding policy, transit data collection. We have a really, really great dashboard. There's a quick screen capture there of it. So a lot of work here in Northern Virginia on making bus better. And I can think of probably 20 different other ways we continue to do that here within our MVTC mission. But I think the last thing I'll leave you all with is we're doing a lot of work here. We're really excited to be really engaged with our partners at Metro, the TPB, looking at these really big picture transit challenges that we have, especially on the bus side, and how can we all keep moving in that same direction to make bus as good a mode as possible. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and talk about the work we're doing here in Northern Virginia.
For members, are there any questions for Mr. Fye? Appears that there are no questions, and so I'd like to thank you again, Alan, for your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the invitation. Look forward to working with everybody here, and novatransit.org is our website. Lots of great information out there. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're about to start the main focus for this morning's session. WMATA staff will speak to each of these three key areas: bus priority, speeding buses on the street, bus stop and station improvements, improving the customer experience and accessibility, and finally, the transition to zero emission buses, critical to meeting our regional climate goals. We will have time for discussion with each topic, so please recognize our time is limited. So please keep your questions brief. For more complex questions, staff will respond with additional information after today. So is Allison Davis, are you here?
I am here. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the board and colleagues who are working to make buses better across the whole national capital region. Waiting for the slides that should be coming up. But I'll keep talking while those come up. So we are hoping to use this work session to identify those opportunities for collective action. When Actually, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Yes, when we're building off that November 2022 briefing that we provided, and unfortunately we didn't have enough time at the end for more discourse. So we're back a couple months later, and we really wanted to make sure when Conti and I were talking about this work session, finding the places that will move the needle and get more people on board buses, but are also things that, you know, whether you're in the WMATA compact or not, these are probably things that your jurisdictions are working on in different ways. So next slide, please. Wanted to make sure that we're, you know, super clear with what a great bus system provides, right? So yes, first and foremost, it's got to connect to where people are going and when they want to travel, right? Like that is first and foremost. But there's a lot of things that we Metro jointly share with our jurisdictional partners to really make sure that the full trip for customers really works well, right? And so that's transfers, that's clean vehicles, safety on board the buses, like on the streets. It's getting that transit priority. How do we make sure that we really focus on that? And then making sure that the bus stops, which many of you own and maintain for us, that those have the shelters, the seating, the lighting, safety for our customers. Next slide. So yes, so we just wanted to make sure that, and I'm going to turn this over to some of my colleagues, but wanted to make sure that we're really hitting a lot of those highlights, either places that TPB can jointly come together, or maybe it's just individual jurisdictions as we work through this. But we really appreciate the partnership that we have with many of you now, and look forward to continuing that in the future. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Raka Chowdhury, who's our Director of Bus Priority.
Thank you. Good morning. As Alison mentioned, I'm Director of Bus Priority at Metro. I'll be presenting. Could you go to the next slide, please? Maybe the next one over. Thanks. So I'll talk a little bit today about why we need bus priority, some of our current initiatives, and some thoughts on how the region's leadership can help us come together as a region to move some of these initiatives forward. So why do we need bus priority? Traffic congestion and reduced speeds impact Metro bus ridership. Right now, the average, can you hear me? Sorry. Okay, great. So right now, the average speed of buses in DC is 9.8 miles per hour. That's been declining every year, and it's a 9% decline over 15 years. So I know when we talk about speeding up buses, people in their minds are thinking about these huge vehicles running down the streets, speeding down DC's roadways, and that's really not what we're trying to get to. If we can get our average bus speed system-wide up from 9.8 miles per hour to 12 miles per hour, we'll be very happy with the performance of our buses, because really the average is slowdowns in segments where it's 3 miles per hour, or so that's kind of where we are trying to get to with our bus priority. And it matters because people are switching modes because of slow buses. In our last customer survey from calendar year 22, so it's between September and December, we found that 1 in 4 riders had switched to another mode, and their stated reason was because the other modes were faster and more reliable. So that's really what we are trying to push back against, bring these riders back, and make buses more reliable for folks who are taking the bus. So a number of factors slow our buses down. On our streets, traffic congestion is the biggest one. For that, we have dedicated bus lanes, and we talked about the Clear Lanes program at our Metro board last week. At signals at traffic intersections, we have Transit Signal Priority, a program that came together with the Tiger Grant that TPB managed in 2015, I believe. And so now we have over 250 intersections with Transit Signal Priority in our region. That's basically software on the bus, infrastructure at the intersection level, where a bus comes up to an intersection, sends a signal to the infrastructure, and then you get an extended green if the light's about to turn red, or a shortened red if the bus arrives at a red light. So we have 250 of those intersections around the region. And then we are working with DC and Maryland to add more queue jumps, and Virginia to add more queue jumps in the region. And queue jumps are the signals where you can actually see the signal. 16th and U is a good example. So you come to an intersection, there's a special signal. The bus basically gets a 3-second jump start, a head start to get through the intersection. And then if you take the bus in the region, you've probably seen there's like a proliferation of bus stops, and this has happened over the last 50 years. If there's somebody with special needs who needs a bus stop close to them, we've gone and installed a bus stop, but then suddenly now there's like 3 bus stops in each block. And then the person moves away, that bus stop remains. And so we've had this proliferation of bus stops when our guidelines really recommend no more than 5 every linear mile. So that's kind of where we are trying to get to. So there are many ways in which we can speed up buses at bus stops as well. DC is doing a lot with bus lanes. Last year, starting I think in summer of 2021, we started working with our Maryland jurisdictions to try and help speed up some of their implementation of bus lanes in Maryland. So we identified corridors where our buses were slowing down, and we reached out to Montgomery County and Prince George's County and said, can we help you with designing some queue jumps? And then we found that these segments were also aligned with their BRT plan. So now we are doing some design for Maryland. We are finishing up final design for tactical bus lanes. On Georgia Avenue, it's a 1-mile segment between 16th Street and Wayne Avenue. And if you can go to the next slide. Could you do the next slide, please? Thank you. And also a 1-mile segment in Prince George's County going to the Suitland Metro. Both of these are supposed to spur and activate, be a catalyst for more development, more bus lanes in both Montgomery and Prince George's County, and kind of help move these along faster. Because we started working on this, and then the RAISE grant application came along, and we had 60% drawings that were ready to go. We decided to put in an application for a RAISE grant. Could you go to the next slide, please? For both of these corridors, we added a lot more. So the tactical bus lanes only design bus lanes. It's repurposing a curbside lane and dedicating it for buses where they get stuck in traffic. The RAISE grant application, we worked with the counties, and we've basically expanded the scope of that work, adding a lot more pedestrian amenities, a lot more crosswalks, making it safer to access, because really a bus corridor is not really useful if people can't get to it. And adding bus shelters and other amenities. These were the 8 merit criteria that we looked at. Of course, you can see lots of metric tons of CO2 are reduced. The biggest finding for us was safety, and it really kind of helped us get this really good return on cost-benefit analysis or return on investment criteria, meeting that criteria for the program. So could you go to the next slide, please? So one thing that we talked about last week at our Metro board meeting was that these bus lanes only work if they are enforced. And right now, if you are anywhere in DC, you'll see they are not enforced. So what we are doing is working with DDOT to launch this program in partnership with DDOT, where there'll be cameras in our buses sending videos and images of violations of bus lanes, and DC will issue the ticket. So we are working on that program. Now we have, I guess our finance committee has approved it. And once the full board authorizes it, we'll start complete installation and then DC, work with DC on integration to begin ticketing sometime this year, late this year. Peer cities, New York and San Francisco, have found that enforced bus lanes really help. This is not the first program in our country where that's happening, but also this is the first time where we are also enforcing bus stops. And that was something that we talked about a lot as we were working with DC, because what we found is a lot of time the bus pulls up to a bus stop or is not able to pull up to a bus stop, but there's someone in a wheelchair waiting to board. And that's really, it's when you are there at a bus stop watching that happen, it is the most upsetting thing to experience, and that is just as a spectator and not someone who's experiencing that. So we all talked through that, and we decided we would also work on enforcing bus stops in addition to bus lanes. So we're looking forward to that. And could you go to the next slide, please? So I think in summary, I think I've taken a lot of my time. So in summary, this map really shows where the current bus lanes are in operation in our region, what's planned in the future, what's in design and engineering, and you can see it's a little bit haphazard. It stops a little, sometimes it just stops at jurisdictional boundaries, which is not how our travelers move. So what we would like support on and help on is longer continuous segments of bus priority across jurisdictional boundaries. I think one thing that commuters and people who are driving and using our other roadway infrastructure in the region, people are confused. So we need to establish regional minimums for bus lanes. So anytime people see a lane painted in red, and anytime we actually do this, it should at the very minimum be peak period, both directions. We should have standardized signages and marking for bus lanes. So that's something we need to come together as a region and make sure that we are doing the same thing wherever we implement bus lanes. I think right now legislation only allows automated camera enforcement in DC, but we need to also be advocating for that in Maryland and Virginia, because as these bus lanes become more common, we will find that they aren't being used appropriately as they should be. And then identify opportunities for shared procurement. I think we've talked a lot about red paint and how expensive that is and how expensive it is to maintain that. But if there is an opportunity for shared procurement for the region, things like that would get a lot easier. Finally, in summary, I'll just end with this beautiful chart from TransLink. You can move about 1,000 to 1,500, 1,400 people per hour in vehicles in one travel lane in a peak period. When buses are moving through that lane in mixed traffic, we can move about up to 1,900 people. But in dedicated bus lanes, we can move up to 4,000 people per hour. So just thinking about that, what if we were able to repurpose lanes across our region, especially some of these major corridors, it would make even the folks who absolutely need to drive, it would make their lives easier too. So that's my presentation, and I'll stop now for questions.
Any questions? Okay.
Can I jump in with one question?
Yes, that was Mr. Allen, I suppose.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was just going to ask if you wanted to expand a little bit on, you kind of laid out some recommendations, and I really appreciate you doing this, of saying, okay, here's a way TPB could help, or each of us as different policymakers. Could you just expand a little bit about that? I mean, I think it's, each of us have our own jurisdiction, so it's a little fraught with peril. So I want to be careful about it. But at the same time, we are trying to think about how do we regionally advocate for bus priority lanes and then the different implements that go within making that successful. And then, of course, each of us probably has different levers to pull. So kind of having a comprehensive ask for TPB members to go back to their jurisdictions to look at, just could you expand a little more about what you think that looks like for us as policymakers and different decision makers, and any recommendations you have about how do we help tie that in so that as each one of us might be taking independent actions, it works together regionally?
I think one of the biggest things is really looking at where maybe the maps and where the current BRT plans end, and does it really make sense to end where it is ending? How does it connect to if there are opportunities for regional connections? So I think that's one of the biggest things that when and I'm trying to think, like, would it be with the DOTs or what? I'm not really sure. Allison has some thoughts, so I'll let Allison jump in and see what she's thinking.
And thank you, Councilmember Allen, for the question. So, one of the things that and Raka's, so the district, as well as we're moving into doing some of this in Maryland, like those tactical bus lanes. How do we? Because there's a lot of thought that like, oh, it needs to be BRT, and trust me, we will happily take BRT if it, when it shows up, right? Arlington, Alexandria built it with Metroway back in 2014. But, finding those opportunities to move quickly, right? Like with H&I in 2019 or 2020?
2019,
19, thank you, Raka. We rolled out red paint, 6 blocks downtown DC, and we have incrementally made improvements to that, right? And I think looking for those opportunities that we can move quickly and not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. And so that is kind of on that, that is very much a jurisdiction by jurisdiction discussion, right? But I think the other thing, and Raka pointed this out, is that automated camera enforcement, because what we've seen where we do put down the red paint, it is not well heeded by our residents who are driving. And so having that automation, because having it manually enforced is just not really a feasible, affordable way forward. So having that automated camera, being able to do that and roll those out, I think is kind of off the cuff. Those are the top 2 things that I think would be most helpful.
And I think, sorry, if I think Montgomery County is doing this whole lane repurposing study, which I think is really kind of what, as a region, we should all be thinking about. We have the infrastructure. We don't need to build tracks for our buses. So can we just regionally agree to create a network of a rubber tired rail system? And I think that's kind of that is the regional help that would really support bus priority. I'll stop.
Thank you. Ms. Takis has his hand up, Mr. Chair. Before that, if I could just add, picking up on Mr. Allen's question, there were a couple things that the TPB had done previously. Eric has just dropped a link. We did a best practices study on enforcing bus lanes. We issued a report to all of the transit operators saying, here are some of the things. So that has a list of strategies, proven strategies that essentially are local actions. So that is one document that we would refer. The other thing that is on this slide, Raka presented, identify opportunities for either shared procurement or sharing facilities amongst jurisdictions. That was another second study that the TPB did, and we will drop the link to that study as well, that identified a number of specific actions local bus operators can collaborate with one another to help bring in some cost efficiencies. So those are some of the ways that the TPB has done, but your question is more about what can the local actions be. So with that, I will turn it over to Takis. You had your hand up.
Thank you, Raka and Allison, for the insightful discussion. I wanted to ask you one thing. So in my experience, it's a limited experience. What I've seen when metropolitan transit systems have tried to make the right of way exclusive, for all the reasons that you mentioned. At the same time, it was not the first thought, but definitely the second one was how to make clear to the other modals, especially to the drivers, the individual car drivers, that this is not the convenient route to take. This is a place where transit has has priority. This is part of the thinking that says, yeah, multimodal is good, but multimodal is also an expression of priority. So, for example, Georgia Avenue would be a bus priority corridor, and this is a level of service that comes before, a BRT level of delivery. So, are we thinking in these terms at all? Do we try to think how to in quotation marks and carefully said, disincentivize, traffic in these main routes, other types of traffic in this main route?
I think if I could jump in, Alison, please help me refresh my memory. Was it 14 years ago, maybe sometime around then? There was a regional study that identified, I believe it was 23 or 24 corridors. It was called the Priority Corridor Study. So there is a network. We have identified 23 or 24 corridors. Now, I don't know if OMATA has recently updated that to reflect the more recent demographic and travel patterns. But the idea that you were talking about, Takis, is not just a network of bus-only lanes, but having identified specific corridors that are most suitable for such a treatment has been done. And those are the kinds of actions that can be taken if it is within a local jurisdictions authority or if it is within a state DOT's authority.
Okay, I will go back and read that. It is before I remember a transit planner telling me that you basically have to make sure, in order to get reduce the delinquency on infringing into the bus lane, etc., you have to make sure that you don't have the congestion or the critical issues there. Therefore, you have to really take care about disincentivizing competing traffic on the same corridor. So yeah, priority corridor is important.
Can I just add to that? I think there's like this whole concept. We talk a lot about induced demand. Adding more lanes induces demand. When you reduce a lane, it reduces demand. So people find other ways to get around and they will start using the bus instead. I think that's kind of where we want to push people, show them how inconvenient it is to drive on Georgia Avenue. So maybe you take the bus instead, or you take the metro, but there are other ways to get around, but also just reducing capacity also reduces demand. And so I think that is something that will help. And then enforcing the bus lanes, it gets more and more inconvenient to drive. And so you've got to.
But there are cities that do that very deliberately. So, for example, on the main bus, on the equivalent of Georgia Avenue, buses have transit signal priority, exclusive lanes, etc. But then drivers know that in a parallel route that will be more available to cars, they will have better traffic throughput conditions there. So they begin not only to avoid Georgia Avenue because they don't have all this right of way, but they begin to be quasi incentivized to use an alternative route that will be clearly designated to their modal so that they know that they have a priority somewhere else. Does it make sense what I'm saying? This is the concept of disentanglement of modals.
I think if I could add a last comment, now we are coming up on time for the next item. Takis, that's been the challenge of achieving mode shift, right? It's not simply by saying, okay, we are going to make it difficult to drive and people will automatically shift to some other mode. There are other practical constraints as to why they are using the mode that they're currently using. To really make it viable, as Alison noted in her chat, their customers have said frequency of service is important. It is not just me being able to go to work and come back, because only 20% of the daily trips are work related. 8 out of 10 trips are non-work related. If we continue to focus on our bus services and frequencies around work, which is rapidly changing and evolving, that is we need to make it very convenient and available and affordable, of course, and to help take them from where they want to go. I think that's been one of the service side challenges in trying to make it very attractive. So anyway, with that, I think we are on to just being mindful of the time. We need to wrap up by 11:45. So the next item is how to make these bus stops and the bus services accessible. So with that, turn it back to you.
So thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Leroy Jones, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Bus Services here at WMATA. Really excited and appreciative to be back before the board today to talk a little bit about the improvements of facilities for customers at bus stops. So as the leader of bus here at WMATA, I'm on the system often, and I look at each trip through the lens of our customers. There are a few things that I look at when I arrive at a bus stop. First, I look to see if it's accessible. Does it have good sidewalks, seating, lighting? Does it have shelters? Is the shelter in good condition? And does it have good customer information? Does it provide real-time customer information? So obviously the placement of over 11,000 bus stops that we have throughout the region doesn't have the infrastructure in place to provide all of the amenities that I just referenced. But I do believe that a bus customer should have the basic amenities such as an accessible bus stop, seating and lighting, and at least some type of information of when that bus should arrive. Lack of these amenities has a negative impact on customers' experience, particularly customers who are transit dependent. In addition, this creates an equity issue. So just a few quick stats that I wanted to point out based on WMATA's research during our fiscal year of FY21. 57% of our bus customers lived in zero-car households. 50% were low income, and that's households that are less than $30,000. And 84% are people of color. So from my perspective, as a transit organization, as transit leaders, we have a responsibility to advocate for our bus customers and implement solutions where possible to improve accessibility and the overall customer experience. Next slide. So what is Metro doing to address this issue? So we're doing quite a few things. First, we're asking for feedback from our customers about what they'd like to see in the new bus network that Allison talked a little bit about earlier, and we're really listening to the feedback. So some feedback obtained during the outreach during the bus network redesign supported everything that I mentioned on the previous slide. Customers have clearly communicated that they want and need better amenities at bus stops. So as noted on the slide, we have a bus stop shelter program, which benefits over 66,000 bus riders weekly. In addition, we have allocated funding to temporarily improve 75 bus shelters that are beyond repair. So far, we have installed 5 temporary bus shelters at our Fort Totten Transit Center. We've gotten some good feedback. We've gotten some not so good feedback, and we've gone back and made some modifications to those bus stops. And again, we really, truly appreciate and value the feedback that we get from our customers, hence the modifications we made to those temporary bus stops. In addition, as you can see on the slide, we've allocated a significant amount of money to invest in the replacement of 262 permanent bus shelters. The last point on this slide is very important. We are actively working with our regional partners, specifically Q in the city of Fairfax and DDOT in the District of Columbia, to implement pilot seating options. So we're really in the early stages of those conversations. But as we make decisions of where to install these seats, we will definitely ensure that equity is truly considered during and throughout the process. So the photo on the previous slide actually is a good example of the options that will be considered for this pilot that I'm talking about, and more to come on that initiative. And as you can see on this particular slide here, this is one of the newer bus shelters that was recently installed over at our Rockville station. Next slide. So you may be wondering, what can the TPB and the TPB members do to help. So we as a committee, I really think that we should develop bus stop standards for the region, not just for WMATA, that provides a defined level for shelters, seating, the level of customer information that we could put for each bus stop based on the type of bus stop that's available based on the infrastructure. Adopt and implement and promote the defined bus stop standards. We really need the DOT support, and we've already started these conversations, particularly in DC, about streamlining the permitting process once we actually kick off this seating pilot installation, because the right-of-way is not owned by WMATA, and also offer support in identifying funding system-wide for initiatives like this. So in closing, while WMATA is the largest bus provider in the DMV, we really appreciate and realize that we are not the only one. And a common thing that I've heard this morning so far amongst all of the presenters have been collaboration. And we will continue to partner and continue taking a collaborative approach to solving these types of issues that will impact all bus providers, because it impacts all bus customers. A bus customer is a bus customer, right? And with that, I'll open it up for comments and questions. Thank you.
Kim, if you can stay on the previous slide that had some specific ways in which members can help out. Thank you. So,
Conti, I have a
Go ahead.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kelly Russell from City of Frederick. You mentioned right-of-ways and placing shelters. We have great difficulty in our county getting access easements to these to right-of-ways on private property. Looking for any tips from anybody on how we can be more persuasive to those landowners that for whatever reason don't want stops or shelters on their property.
Any thoughts? Alan, you should feel free to. Allison.
So I'll chime in with that. I think first it starts really talking to the DOTs directly, right? And maybe if we can approach it from that perspective and as a collective group, and not just do it as one-offs to say this is what we're trying to do as a region, I think we will see better success that way. But I agree with you. You do have some folks that just don't want a bus stop in front of their house or on that section of the right of way. But I think if we attack this from a collective perspective, I think we may see more success.
I'll chime in too. I'm guessing it's kind of a commercial one that has a pretty big frontage. And so there's no way to just kind of move it ever so slightly just to get, because it's almost, while it would be great to be right there, if there's a way to kind of move it one way or the other to not have to deal with that specific landowner, that may be an opportunity there. It just depends how big that space is. But I think it's also like how we kind of look beyond, like there would be the perfect place for the bus stop, but are there other places along that corridor that may work? But again, I don't know that specific example.
Are there any programs to incentivize, like to monetize an opportunity for a landowner that, you know, putting a shelter here gets them something?
Not aware of that at this time.
So, Ms. Russell, were you thinking along the lines of perhaps some advertising or some other ways in which the commercial landowner might be incentivized?
And yeah, advertising, or you know, we pay them. Somehow they get a monetary reward for it, saying, yes, you can access a shelter, or yes, you can have free advertising on the shelter for your business. I know we have a program, or not we, the county has a program that has advertisers essentially paying for shelters. They just need the right of way. We just have great difficulty in getting people to acquiesce to that.
Got you. something we'll note and look into some best practices, particularly those who have had big success in bus-only lanes, and particularly this idea of standardized bus shelters with certain features that provide them with safety, safe lighting, good lighting, and cover from the elements. If what could be done there. Thank you. Thank you, Leroy. Unless there are any other questions, we are on to the third topic, which ties it once again to one of the TPB's planning priorities, the climate change and transitioning to zero emission buses.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It looks like someone else has a hand up before I start.
Thank you. Just very quickly, a comment and a question. The comment is with respect to bus shelters in more urbanized areas like Tacoma Park. The issue with folks not wanting a bus shelter in front of their place is safety. So my comment is, that's my comment. The question is, I think this is a good idea to put forward some proposed standards for the region, that TPP might take that on as a project. So my question is, what is the mechanism for doing that? Do we introduce a motion? Does the staff come with a proposal? Conti, please help me out here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bala. I thought Leroy said that it was something that WMATA is looking at. The bus stops are essentially owned, operated, constructed by the locality within which those bus stops are. So in terms of developing a regional standard, I think unless I misheard Leroy, they were saying that WMATA is looking at that. So if WMATA is looking at some of the standard features or the minimal features that provides for safety, good lighting, good access, and makes the bus stop more welcoming and attractive to the rider. If they are working on that, then certainly that is something we can bring to the board for its endorsement. If the TPB member jurisdictions who really have the responsibility for designing, operating, and maintaining these bus stops, if there's a general sense that rather than each one of us try to develop what we have, let's see if we can develop a regional one. And if WMATA is not already doing it, then certainly that is something that the TPB can look into if we will have the resource to do it. Like I said before, we have done a number of such studies in the past related to bus. We have not done something like this, but it is something that we could consider. And
so if I could just chime in, yeah, obviously we're doing a lot of work from a WMATA perspective, but we really would like to move and take this more from a regional approach. And that's what we are specifically asking support from the TPB on, is to kind of help us get to that point collectively as a region. So if you all could help take that on, and obviously we definitely will be at the table contributing our thoughts, but I think it's worthwhile to get the thoughts and comments of others so that it's not a WMATA standard, it's not a Q standard, it's not a DASH standard. You know what I mean? It's a regional standard.
Gotcha.
So Cindy, I appreciate the comment and the question.
Thank you, Leroy. Okay. We're on to the last of the three items. Amy?
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Masrobian, the Director of Zero Emission Vehicles for Metro. So today I'll give a brief overview of Metro's plans to transition to a 100% zero emission bus fleet. So as we're thinking about this transition, some of the challenges and considerations that we are thinking through is, we have a fleet of almost 1,600 buses, and we'll need to buy the zero emission buses to replace our current fleet. But it's really more than just the buses. There are a whole complement of activities that we really need to roll out and invest in to support this transition and make sure it's effective. So other things that we're thinking through are constructing and installing charging infrastructure and charging equipment at 9 of our bus divisions throughout DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And you can imagine, some of our garages have upwards of 100 buses at them. And so thinking about all of that charging that may go on overnight, we're working with our regional utility partners to determine what kind of utility grid upgrades are needed to provide the infrastructure on the utility side of the meter to support our bus garages to have all of that incoming power needed for charging. We're also thinking about the funding that we need to support the transition, both to procure buses, to make the facility upgrades, to support workforce training and development activities. We need to think about all of the training that especially our frontline staff and staff throughout the organization needs to be able to operate and maintain new buses and make sure that things are deployed safely. And finally, we need to continue to assess the state of zero emission technology, which is rapidly evolving. Right now, we are looking at deploying buses and infrastructure for battery electric buses, but we're continuing to evaluate the technology and market for hydrogen fuel cell electric buses, which is the other zero emission bus technology on the market today. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is Metro doing? We have a number of activities underway, knowing that the scale of this transition is going to be really significant. So we have a few of our bus divisions that are already in the reconstruction process, and those are Northern and Bladensburg bus garages. So we've decided to incorporate designs so that when those facilities reopen, they'll be able to support zero emission buses, specifically battery electric buses for those two facilities. And then we have two more bus divisions where we're in the planning stages. Those are Western and Cinderbed Road divisions, where those will be the next where we will be incorporating design and construction activities to put in the infrastructure so that those facilities can support zero emission buses when they reopen as well. For a number of years, we've been planning and implementing our first phase of zero emission bus deployments. And this includes 12 battery electric buses and overhead pantograph charging at Shepherd Parkway Bus Division in Southwest DC. And so this initial work is really giving us the experience with both the buses and the charging equipment, helping us to identify some of the training that's needed and understand what kind of safety considerations and training and design is needed so that we can make sure that things are safely implemented going forward. So we're looking forward to this program and all of the lessons learned that we gather from our regional and national transit agency peers to really help us as we scale up throughout the organization. Another thing that we recently did last month, we presented to the Metro Board of Directors our zero emission bus transition plan. And this outlines all of the things that we need to do to our fleet, our facilities, and our internal workforce and operations to support a transition to all zero emission buses by 2042. So initially, our board set out a goal of complete conversion by 2045, and this plan allows us to get there 3 years sooner. So we'll continue to look for opportunities to accelerate the transition as we get a lot of the bus procurement and facility construction work underway as well. And then finally, last month, we launched a regional zero emission bus coordination group. And this group includes folks from throughout the region as a subcommittee to the National Capital Region Bus Leaders Committee. And we have participants from transit agencies throughout the region where we're trying to identify our shared areas of coordination that are a priority for the whole region to help accelerate and make more efficient the transition to zero emission buses for the region as a whole. And so we're in the initial phases. We just had our kickoff meeting last month, and we'll be meeting again this summer to talk a little bit more about our priorities. Next slide, please. So this slide is talking about how TPP can potentially assist. So in that regional zero emission bus coordination group I was just mentioning, again, we're working through what our top areas for moving forward together as a region are. And so some of these are included on the slide, and I can talk through a few of them, but one possible area for TPP or member engagement is as we identify which of these areas we'd like to move forward with, I think there will be potential opportunities for engagement and support going forward. So just a few that I will mention. One on here is resilience options. So this is thinking through as we're moving to battery electric buses where we're relying on electricity as a source of fuel, what happens if there's an electricity outage or disruption, and do we have the infrastructure, the plans in place so that we can make sure that we're providing reliable bus service even with this new fuel type? And given that these are pretty rare events, there might be opportunities to coordinate regionally so that we can have backup plans or strategies that can benefit multiple agencies throughout the region in a more cost-effective way. So that might be something we want to pursue. Workforce development and training that can be coordinated among regional partners, and even things like coordinating with regional first responders, so they have the knowledge and the training that they need to respond to any incidents should they happen with zero emission buses. And then the last thing on the list that I think a lot of folks are interested in are opportunities for shared capital investments, such as en route charging for battery electric buses. And so these are a number of things that we'll be trying to further define and prioritize in our regional zero emission group that may need some additional regional support going forward. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amy. Mr. Collins, that was the last item. We are just a few more minutes before wrap up, so I'll turn it back to you.
And we're kind of running out of time, but I wanted to see if there were perhaps like one or two questions as a result of the zero emission buses presentation.
I don't see any hands raised in the chat, Mr. Collins.
Okay. So I get Conti, at this time, you do your wrap up.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So going back to what I noted as expectations for the session today, it's my sense that the first takeaway is the importance of the role of TPB member jurisdictions in actively working to implement the three topics that were discussed today to really make bus service better and more reliable. And those three topics are bus priority treatments on the roadways, bus stops and access to bus stops, and the transition to cleaner fuel vehicles. There were a number of suggestions that the presenters shared for the consideration of TPB members. We will follow up with providing a summary of those suggestions. And there were a few other studies that were referenced during the discussion and a number of links in the chat. We will compile all of that into an easy to access takeaways for members from today's discussion. The second takeaway is, So that would list what are all the kinds of things that individual member jurisdictions can act on. The second takeaway from my perspective is how can the TPB help make better bus service? Of course, recognizing that better bus service is critical to meeting our climate equity and mobility goals. So my quick notes on the takeaways for the TPB is the TPB should continue having these kinds of conversations at the board and at our technical committee levels, where we can share lessons learned and opportunities that are available for collaboration. Second, continuing the kinds of TPB studies that would support the public transportation and help members with a set of standardized or a best practices approach. The TPB would continue to do the transportation land use collections program grants, which would help with bus stop design, bus access, and activities along those lines. Couple things I would note. I'm glad that we have had this discussion. We have already put aside staff and funding for 2 studies that were discussed today. First is a study of bus transit to and from the region's high capacity transit station locations. Earlier in Eric's presentation, he reviewed how buses are critical to getting people to metro station or VRE or MARC stations. How can that local connection be provided? So we have some staff funding available to undertake such a study. We can identify which of the high capacity transit station areas, there are 225 of them supposed to be in our region by 2030, which are the most opportune locations to have local bus services to provide that connectivity, considering the current and potential local bus services at these locations. And the second study we have staff resources and funding set aside is transitioning to zero emission buses. Zero emission vehicles in transit is very different from private vehicles, and it has some unique needs and challenges. Amy touched on a couple of them. We will have some funding. We will work with the transit operators to design a study that will be based on how can, and many of the transit operators are already engaged in this, but we can work with them to see how a TPB study can complement their work. In that, particularly, it could include where to locate these chargers and what have you. So those are 2 studies for which we already have staffing and funding allocated. Also, during the discussion, the third takeaway is I heard some interest in the TPB taking the lead to examine and develop regional minimal bus stop standards. That is something we can look into. The budget that was already approved has funding for the other 2 studies. We will definitely commit to looking into what can be done in terms of a regional approach for developing regional minimal bus stop standards. So that's a quick takeaway, unless I've missed anything. Eric, I know you've been taking notes as well. Anything I missed?
I don't have anything to add, Kanti. Just a note that, again, all the presentations from today are posted on the website. This recording will also be posted on our YouTube legacy page. And additional links to studies are in some of the documents as well that are posted if people are interested in follow-up. Otherwise, I think our plan is that we'll take some of the key questions from today and provide additional information in the form of a memo and circulate that back to the board and other attendees today over the next month.
Thank you. So with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Collins.
That appears to be the final word. And with that, that concludes today's work session. There will be a brief recap during the course of our meeting at 12 today. So with all business done for this work session, our work session is officially adjourned, and we will see each other at 12 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Lynn,
Yes.
did we just stay here?
Yeah, yeah. Kim's putting up a timer and there's like a hiccup. But anyway, yeah, so we'll we'll just kick back up in 10 minutes.
That's fine. That's fine. I think it's my first time being in this end of it. Okay, do I just stay here or not?
Yeah,
But
we do work sessions a couple times a year, depending upon the topics. There's just not enough time on the TPB agenda. So it's pretty informal. It's all good. We stream it on the same thing, so people watching as well can just hang on to.
okay. But this is Richard, by the way.
Yeah, I figured out.
Oh. And there's 20,000.
Hey, Mark Rawlings, did you send, I know we had to send an updated link, but I don't know if we have Sandra's email address. Mark Rawlings, are you listening? You're a new person.
Mark may have stepped away. You may want to drop it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, so he emailed, you saw that probably.
Oh, okay, good.
I think I can find it though. It just occurred to me that she wouldn't be on the master list because she just got added yesterday. I got it.
Okay. Good
So it's
afternoon,
a little
Mr.
after
Collins.
12. We're already streaming, so that's all good things.
Okay. So,
We
Mr.
ready?
Collins, we are ready to
All
get
right.
started.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruben Collins. I'm Chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call today's TPB's meeting to order. That's April 19th, 2023. The upgrade to the audio and video systems in our boardroom has required us to hold this meeting virtually. In keeping with our practice, this meeting is being live streamed on TPB's YouTube channel. While we are familiar with virtual meeting procedures, for the benefit of those following the meeting online, I will briefly review those procedures. At the start of the meeting, I will ask staff to take a roll call of members and alternates to document their presence at this meeting and to determine whether or not we have a quorum. For each item on the agenda, I will ask the presenter to complete their briefing. Then I will entertain questions and comments from members. And this will be by jurisdiction. So please use the raised hand icon if you wish to speak, and staff will recognize you and state your name. For the action items on the agenda, after the presenter completes the briefing, if there is a resolution to adopt, I will invite a motion to approve the resolution and then seek a second for the motion made. So please state your name as you make a motion or second. After the motion has been made and seconded, I will invite questions or comments in turn by jurisdiction. Members, please use the raised hand icon if you wish to speak, and staff will call out your name. After discussion, I will call for a vote in turn by jurisdiction. I will seek just nays and abstentions, and take the rest as a vote in the affirmative. I do want to adhere to the schedule and conclude the meeting on time. So I do request all to be mindful of time during your comments and questions. Lastly, a friendly reminder to please mute your microphones always, and to unmute and state your jurisdiction when you speak. So Lynn, at this time, could you please take the roll call?
Thanks, Chair Collins. So I'm going to state the name of your jurisdiction. If you could please state your name. And also, if I go too fast, we're also monitoring the participant chat. So not to worry, we will capture you. All right, first up, District of Columbia, DC Council, Ms. Brooke Pinto. DC Council, Charles Allen. DC Council, Christina Henderson.
Here.
Thanks. DC Department of Transportation.
Sandra Marks.
Thanks. Moving on, DC Office of Planning. Dan or Sakina? Okay. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County.
Here.
Thanks. College Park.
Present.
Thanks, Ms. Mitchell. Frederick County.
Mark Meschler present.
Thanks, Mark. City of Frederick.
Russell, present.
Thank you. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris is present.
Thank you. City of Greenbelt. City of Laurel.
Brian Lee present.
Thank you. Montgomery County.
Gary Ehrenrich is present.
Sorry, Marilyn Balcom present too. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Got you both. Okay. Prince George's County.
Say Benley, present.
Thanks,
Victor Weisberg also present.
Okay, thanks. Anyone from Prince George's County Council? Okay. Moving on to Rockville.
Hi, Bridget Donald Newton is present.
Bridget. Tacoma Park.
Cindy DeBala is present.
Thank you.
Shayna Fulcher also present.
Shayna. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Heather Murphy present.
Thanks, Heather. Maryland House of Delegates.
Mark Corman present.
Chris Fair present.
Great, thank you. We have a new member, Mr. Fair's here. And Maryland Senate. Okay, moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
Mrs. Koenig present.
Thanks, Koenig. Arlington County.
Tax Carrington is present.
Thank you. City of Fairfax.
Catherine Reed present.
Thank you. Fairfax County.
Walter Alcorn present.
James Walkinshaw present.
Thank you. Falls Church.
David Snyder present.
Thank you. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger present.
Thank you. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt present.
Thank you. Is Mr. Letourneau here? Moving on, City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky is here.
Thank you. City of Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
And Wheeler present.
Thanks.
And this is Paulo Belita, alternate. Supervisor Avery should be joining shortly.
Okay, cool. We'll keep an eye out. Virginia Department of Transportation.
John Lynch is present.
Thanks. Virginia House of Representatives. Virginia Senate.
Senator Dave Marsden present.
Great, thank you. All right, WMATA.
Allison Davis present.
Thanks. Moving on to our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, National Capital Planning Commission.
Julia Coster is present.
Thanks, Julia. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and National Park Service. Okay, great. That completes roll call. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Lynn. At this time, if you could, Lynn, summarize the public comments that we have, if there are any.
Great, thanks. So between March 2023, our March TPB meeting, and noon yesterday, April 18th, the TPB received 11 comments submitted via email and 13 comments submitted from our Visualize 2045 initial project list feedback form. So a memo with the summary of all the comments, as well as the entire 63 pages of comments, can be found on our TPB meeting page. So as I mentioned last month, we've created a project list feedback form on our comment page to help share specific project comments with project sponsors. So we'll be sharing comments twice a month, both at our technical committee and here at TPB, as we know people are working on the project list now. And all those comments are attached to this memo. So due to timing, I'm not going to read all the ones from the forum, but I will touch on the rest of the comments. Arlene Montemorano shared several articles. The first is called McLean Residents Sue to Stop I-495 Widening Over Environmental Impacts by Angela Woolsey. The second article is an opinion piece called Maryland Residents Won When a Toll Lane Plan Failed by Robert McGarry. And the third is a newsletter from In the Public Interest, which is promoting a book called Privatization of Everything. Next up, Bill Pugh, on behalf of the Coalition for Smarter Growth, submitted two comments for Virginia and Maryland board members for their consideration as they re-examine and resubmit projects. Both letters are titled Visualize 2050 Project Submissions Need to Change to Reflect Adopted Regional Policies for Climate, Safety, Equity, and Walkable Transit-Friendly Communities. These letters also provided some more detailed suggestions. Lindsay Middleton, on behalf of the Maryland Sierra Club, submitted a letter with detailed comments regarding Visualize 2050 as the TPB reexamines and resubmits projects. And the enclosed letter asks the TPB to remove the I-495 and I-270 toll lane projects and other highway widening projects, and instead promote transit, TOD, and pedestrian cycling infrastructure projects. Sally Stoltz, the co-coordinator of don'twiden270.org, submitted comment asking the TPB board members to remove the I-495, I-270 op lanes projects from the long range plan. A letter detailing concerns related to the projects is enclosed. Tina Slater, a former CAC member, submitted comments asking the TPB member agencies to review and revisit all projects not currently under construction or in final stages of design for Visualize 2050. They asked the TPB to remove the I-495-270 project from the plan and to consider sustainable and equitable alternatives. They also suggested other projects for consideration. Margaret Shope, on behalf of the TAME Coalition, submitted comments suggesting that Middlebrook Road extended widening should be removed from the long-range transportation plan, citing the removal of the Mid-County Highway extended M83 as a similar project. Gail Sullivan, a current CAC member, shared concern about express lanes being incorporated into major road projects. They added that express lanes should prioritize buses, motorcycles, and bicycles, and that improving public transportation may cause people to consider environmentally friendly modes. Lastly, Tad Aburn shared comments asking about how the TPB is addressing how regional transportation planning unintentionally creates environmental justice concerns. They included several letters with additional detail on their concerns, some of which have previously been shared with you before. So as I mentioned, all of the comments are found on our meeting page, and all the comments related to the Visualize 2045 project, the projects from before and the inputs to 2050 will be resummarized again. We're keeping track of these and we'll share them all at the very end as well. When I say end, the end of this year, you'll hear me talk about our schedule coming up. Anyway, that concludes my report. Thank you, Chair Collins.
And thank you, Lynn. The next item on the agenda is approval of the March 15th minutes. And again, if you move for adoption, please state your name and jurisdiction as you make the motion. I see Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Denise Mitchell, City of College Park, move to adopt.
Pam Sabowski Manassas City second.
Okay, it's been moved and properly second. Are there any corrections? I guess I should have asked that. Hearing that there are none. We'll start the vote with any nays or abstentions. Are there any nays or abstentions? Appearing that there are none, from the District of Columbia, Maryland, or Virginia, or from WMATA. Appearing that there are no abstentions or nays, the vote then passes. The next item on the agenda is the technical committee report. Mr. Mark Rawlings, who is the chair of the technical committee. How are you, sir?
Doing very well, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. The technical committee met on Friday, April the 7th. Written summary was included with your meeting packet, so I'll be brief with my report. 4 items were reviewed for inclusion on today's TPB agenda. This included a briefing on the TPB's upcoming approval of the Regional Bike to Work Day 2023 proclamation. Regional Bike to Work Day events are being organized at over 100 locations in the region for Friday, May the 19th. The committee received a briefing on the Visualize 2050, specifically including the updated schedule approval, comments received to date, and the March listening sessions takeaways. The committee received a briefing on the TPB's upcoming approval of the FY 2024 Transportation Land Use Connections Program Technical Assistance recipients. And the committee received a briefing on the TPB's Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan update. The coordinated plan guides the Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 Enhanced Mobility for Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program. Additionally, 3 items were presented for information and discussion. These included a briefing on Ride On Reimagined, a comprehensive assessment of the bus network in Montgomery County based on current and future needs. This study will take an in-depth look at Montgomery County's existing and planned transit systems, including Metro bus services that operate within the county limits and future Purple Line. The committee was briefed on the carbon reduction program, which was established by the bipartisan infrastructure law and provides funds for projects designed to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from on-road transportation. And the committee was briefed on staff efforts to develop new motor vehicle emission budgets, which are required for use in the air quality conformity analysis for long-range transportation plans and transportation improvement programs. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rawlings. Starting by jurisdictions, are there any questions from the state of Maryland? From the District of Columbia? From WMATA and other agencies? And again, thank you, Mr. Rawlings. Next, report from the Community Advisory Committee. Mr. Richard Wallace is the chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Wallace. Do you have a brief report for today?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Richard Wallace here. I'll be very brief. On April 13th, the CAC members met and we discussed quite a bit of information. The committee received a presentation about the TPB coordinated consolidated plan. Members and questions were asked and some clarification questions were needed, and the members were very enthusiastic in asking their questions. Clarifying questions about the Enhanced Mobility Grant Program and coordinated plans were asked. Enthusiasm to share the plan and public comments period with members within the community. The committee also heard remarks about the TPB and CAC role in the long-range planning process. Member comments and questions covered a robust discussion on land use and travel patterns anticipated in the plan, asking the TPB to keep in mind areas that are more reliant on automobiles and to rethink the status quo about how to build infrastructure. Questions about how the long-range plan will address uncertainty around the future of telework, clarifying questions about exempt and non-exempt projects and WMATA's role in the plan. The CAC the next CSC meeting will be held May 11th in a hybrid format with in-person and options of being attendance at the COG. Again, these meetings that we had was very robust, and we were very enlightened. And I like that the members are getting the information they're needing, so we could make more, informed decisions as we have our meetings. I could see the last several meetings we had. Each member is getting a bit more confident and bold about more detailed questions that we can ask and how it could be more of an asset to the board. So thank you all very much for the opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wallace. So this is another opportunity for questions. And we'll begin this time with the state of Virginia. Any questions from the state of Virginia? Questions from the state of Maryland? The District of Columbia? WMATA and other agencies? Okay, thank you, Mr. Wallace. The next item on the agenda is steering committee actions and report from the director.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. As you have a copy of my written report, I will not review in great detail, but I'll just highlight some of the items there. The steering committee met on April 7th, and Lynn Erickson served as the lead staff since I was on leave. So that part of the report is on her behalf. The steering committee approved 4 amendments to our FY 2023 through 2026 TIP. The first amendment was at the request of the District Department of Transportation, where they added about $432 million total for 3 separate projects. The first one is a citywide program on its street lights. So that received bulk of the money. This is the annual allocation for their year-long activities, about $423 million. And they also proposed adding about $3.6 million for the weighing in motion to enforce size and weight restrictions on some of the district's roadways. And then finally, they also proposed adding about $5 million for various planning activities, which is really a District Department of Transportation's match for TPB funding and other activities. Details of those amendments and these projects are on pages 4 through 12. The second TIP amendment was requested for the TPB by the District Department of Transportation. And this is because it's a TPB program, and typically we have relied on member agencies to provide the lead for TIP amendments. And this is a good news activity where the TPB staff submitted a grant application to the FTA for a program called Innovative Coordinated Access and Mobility, ICAM program. And we were happy to receive $100,000 in grant. And we are also very happy that WMATA agreed to provide $25,000 in matching funds. This fund will be used to make improvements to a tool that the TPB created a few years ago with some other federal grant, and it's called Reach a Ride tool. And it's a tool that is available on the website, on your smartphones, that provides information on transportation services available for people with disabilities. The details of this grant and this TIP amendment are on pages 13 through 17. The third amendment was requested by the Maryland Transit Administration and MDOT, where it added about $1.9 million for a new transit-oriented development project along the Purple Line corridor. The final amendment was requested by the Virginia Department of Transportation, where it added about $59 million for the ongoing project, the North Star Boulevard extension. And the details are on pages 24 through 26. Now, moving to the second part of my memo under letters sent and received, the TPB issued a few letters of support for its member agencies seeking various federal grants. FTA's Bus and Bus Facility Grant Program funds by Charles County for funding to build a maintenance facility for their Van Gogh service. The second letter of support TPB issued was for a low and no emissions grant program. That was an application by WMATA for their electric bus infrastructure at Cedar Bed Bus Garage. And then there was another low and no emissions grant program application by Montgomery County for their battery electric bus and microgrid project. Then on page 31 is a comment letter from MVAC to the US EPA. The US EPA recently released the draft of updated guidance on developing what is called the contingency measures in a state implementation plan. Members may recall that state implementation plans, or SIPs as they're called, these are required by the US EPA to be submitted by areas that are not in attainment of federal air quality standards. This region is in the process of developing a SIP for the 2015 ozone standards. And these new guidelines of including contingency measures create some issues for our region. MVAC held a detailed discussion on it, and they have proposed writing a letter to the EPA. We participated in those discussions. We've reviewed the letter. We've included here. We generally support the sentiments expressed there by MVAC. One more letter that was received after the mail out, and it is on the TPB meeting page, but not in the same memo packet, is a letter from WMATA. And the good news there is on April 17, this past Monday, Metro unveiled its draft visionary bus network that it has come up with as part of its bus network redesign project. And this proposed bus network has been released for public comment. The draft visionary network fully incorporates the service of all of Metro buses and Prince George's County's the bus system, as well as the City of Fairfax queue systems. And it builds on other local bus providers' existing services. In the memo, there are highlights of what is in this visionary network and some important hyperlinks to additional documents. Also, this letter notes that it's 50 years since Metro Bus started operating. Therefore, Metro is hosting 50 events over 50 days to gather valuable input on the draft visionary network. The initiative will be launched on April 21st, and details of this launch event are in the memo as well. Finally, under other announcements and updates, TPB staff, this is very exciting. TPB staff will be conducting a public webinar tomorrow to showcase some of the recent examples of the TPB's Transportation Land Use Connections grant projects, as well as the Regional Roadway Safety Program grant funded projects. So these are projects that have that are related to pedestrian safety plans, trail design, bike safety education. So it covers the gamut of connecting transportation and land use, as well as improving safety. So that is a public webinar that's being scheduled for tomorrow. Second, TPB staff is accepting applications from Maryland jurisdictions for grant funding from the Federal Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Program. Applications will be accepted through May 15th, and the details are on page 35. And last two items under announcements are very timely and interesting in the sense that the TPB is engaged in updating its long-range plan. Maryland is also updating their statewide long-range transportation plan, and it's called the 2050 Maryland Transportation Plan. And MDOT is seeking public input, and it has also developed a survey for the public, and the details of that are on page 36. At the same time Maryland is doing, coincidentally, Virginia is also developing their 6-year transportation program, and it is conducting public meetings, seeking input from the public. The public input session in Northern Virginia is scheduled on May 1st, and details are there on page 37. Those were the items with the documents that we have shared. If I could, there are 3 other items that are late developing and that is not part of the memo. And first, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which selects the projects to fund and implement throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, will be conducting this public meeting, as I mentioned just a minute ago, on their 6-year improvement program on May 1st. The General Assembly in the Commonwealth of Virginia this year passed a law requiring MPOs to be invited to these meetings. So the TPB has been invited to attend the meeting on May 1st. And this meeting is really a listening session where members of the public can come and provide input on what kinds of projects, programs, and policies they would like to see funded and implemented. A number of other Virginia agencies will be at this meeting. VDOT, Department of Rail and Public Transportation, VRE, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. So on TPB's behalf, staff will be attending and listening to the input from the members, and we will share that summary with the board. Just one thing to note is all these other agencies do fund and implement projects. The TPB does not, but it is still valuable and important input from the public on what they would like to see in the transportation plan. The second announcement is, as you are aware, COG has been releasing podcasts on various topics, whether it's land use, transportation, environment, public safety. The most recent one was on roadway safety. TPB member Kelly Russell from the city of Frederick was a featured speaker, given that it was during her tenure that the TPB adopted a set of specific roadway safety strategies and also established the regional roadway safety grant program. Thank you, Ms. Kelly, for taking the time. The guest list also included Hillary Orr from the City of Alexandria's Department of Transportation and Environmental Services, and a member of your staff, Andrew Meese. The topics discussed in this podcast, which I found very interesting, is redesigning streets so that all users can coexist safely within our transportation network, and how to use the TPB's equity tool to help address issues in historically underserved areas, and also how to increase public outreach and education on the shared responsibility for improving roadway safety. I would definitely recommend a listen. It's a very good listen and a very short listen. The final topic, on April 12th of this year, EPA announced new rules that it plans to implement with new and more stringent emission standards for light duty and medium duty vehicles pertaining to greenhouse gases, as well as emission standards and greenhouse gases for heavy duty vehicles for model years 2027 through 2032. Additionally, EPA is proposing standards for nitrogen oxides and non-methane organic gases. All of this is going to be significantly helpful in achieving reduction in greenhouse gases and reduction in nitrogen oxides for our ozone, for our region. The EPA will have a 60-day public comment period once the rules are officially published. TPB staff, we are already studying these proposed rules. We are working with Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee staff, and staff will bring back recommendations on providing comments. And I would suggest and recommend the TPB become a joint signatory of these comments along with MVAC, as it has done in the past. So a number of things coming together in terms of federal actions that can help us achieve some of our tough to achieve environmental goals. That's a quick overview of a bunch of activities since the mail out went out last week. So with that, I conclude my remarks and I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Do we have any questions for Conti from the District of Columbia? How about from the state of Maryland?
Yes, Brian Lee, City of Laurel. Thank you, Conti. I just want to go back to where you said that we got the grant on disability transportation links in the area. Is there any way that we could drop that link into some of the municipal apps so that our residents, when they hit the My Laurel app, can also hit that link?
Absolutely. We'll work with you. Nick Rampus, who will be on the agenda shortly, is leading that program. We'll provide the link and we will definitely be happy to assist local jurisdictions in including that in any other forums of outreach that they are conducting. Certainly. Thank you. Good suggestion, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a, let's see, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you're ready to get to Virginia, I'd like to make a comment, but I'm sure my Maryland colleagues would be very pleased to keep me in Virginia. So,
Any further questions from the state of Maryland? Okay, now the state of Virginia.
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I was following a WTOP story which ranked the DC region with an F, which when I went to school was a really bad grade. And yet we've made, I think, significant progress in terms of air quality. So I'm wondering if the Council of Governments could prepare some information that we could use in discussing this with our constituents, as well as any media follow-up on the story. Thanks.
Certainly, Mr. Snyder. I think that's a good suggestion. You're right. While there continues to be work to be done and more that the region can achieve in cleaning its air, there's significant progress has been made in terms of the region meeting the federal air quality standards, which has increasingly gotten stricter since the very first one sometime in the early 90s. We'll put something together which highlights all the work that has been done at the local level and the state level, and we'll definitely share it with the board members. I will work with the MVAC staff on it.
But I think it still stands for the proposition that there's more we have to do, including in the transportation sector.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any further questions from the state of Virginia? Okay. Do we have any questions from our agencies and WMATA, of course? Ms. Davis?
You're muted, Allison.
I took my hand down, but did not unmute myself. But so thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Kati, for allowing us to put the information in about the Visionary Network. So I just want to make sure that everyone is invited to our launch party. We're also having events throughout the region to hear from your constituents on the Visionary Network. But again, like we want to hear from people. We've got surveys, we've got different ways to engage, and we'll be out for the next 50 days to hear from people and talk to customers, future customers, as well as everyone in between. So I dropped some of the information into the chat, but thank you for taking time to push all that information out to your constituents as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? And again, thank you, Conti. The next item on the agenda is chairman's remarks, and they will be brief today. The focus of today's work session was the topic of how to make bus service in our region better. It included bus services operated by WMATA and services operated by the localities. I'd like to thank WMATA for presenting information and initiating discussions on a few specific aspects of enhanced bus service. It was a great discussion specifically about how localities and state DOTs can assist to improve reliability of bus service by implementing a variety of bus priority treatment on the roadways. We will have a staff report later during the meeting on this very subject. So the next item on the agenda is approval of the Regional Bike to Work Day 2023 proclamation. In the first three actions of today's meeting, I will be seeking unanimous consent to approve a proclamation for May 19th, 2023 as Bike Work Day. First, our staff with Nicholas Ramphos will provide a brief background about this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we do have a presentation. And so, as you all may know, Bike to Work Day is a really fun and healthy annual event to inspire more bicycling to work as a viable means of transportation throughout the region. We go to the next slide. And it all started through the League of American Bicyclists back in the 50s. And locally, it was organized by WABA at a single location in DC. And then in 2001, TPB's Commuter Connections program joined forces with WABA to co-organize and expand the event to a regional level. Next slide. And combine both WABA and Commuter Connections provide a multitude of support for bicyclists. WABA gives hands-on instructional bicycling classes. We provide bike to work guides. We have an online bike route finder. And this year, Bike to Work Day will have 108 pit stops located within the 22 COG member jurisdictions. And bicyclists will also qualify for the Commuter Connections Guaranteed Ride Home program. Next slide. The first 15,000 who register and attend a pit stop will receive a free t-shirt, and other free items include a regional bike map and other helpful bicycling literature giveaways, food and beverages, as well as bike tune-ups. Next slide. This chart shows Bike to Work Day growth by the number of registered bicyclists. So from the onset, registration numbers climbed just about every year, as you can see, peaking in 2017 at over 18,000. The 2020 event was canceled due to the pandemic, and over the last 2 years, Bike to Work Day has started to regain lost ground due to the pandemic. Next slide. Many employers support bicycling as bike commuters tend to be healthier, and healthier employees mean fewer sick days. Bicycle parking also takes up a little room compared to the high expense of automobile parking. And each year, Commuter Connections recognizes an employer in the region who has outstanding participation in Bike to Work Day by having a luncheon for those cyclists. Last year's winner was the University of Maryland. Next slide. Employers also play a big part in bike commuting by providing amenities and benefits to encourage bicycling to the work site. The more an employer can do to support bicycling, the higher the level of employees will bike to work. I think we can go to the next slide as well. And we can go one more, please. There is a Bike to Work Day survey that's conducted every 3 years, and response rates are always very high as the bicycling community is very involved and passionate about bicycling. And the purpose of the survey is to gauge the impact that Bike to Work Day has on getting commuters to try bicycling to work for the first time, and to what extent they can continue to bicycle afterwards. And results of the survey are applied to the Commuter Connections TDM program analysis. Next slide, please. Just some quick stats on this. The event appeals to a wide range of age groups between the ages of 25 and 64. Next slide. And most participants live in Virginia and work in the District of Columbia. Next slide. And there's slightly more than a third of the participants working in the private sector, and about a third work for the federal government, and about a fifth for nonprofits. Next slide. And prior to Bike to Work Day, 13% of respondents really never commuted by bicycle. And then afterwards, 23% of new rider respondents started bicycling to work about 2.5 days a week. Next slide. The survey also asked participants about their favorite aspects of the event. So sharing the ride, the pit stop atmosphere itself, and the free stuff were the top responses. Next slide. We do have a rain date policy, so it is a rain or shine event. Pit stops are, however, asked to have a plan B ready in the event of inclement weather. So the plans can include arrangements for building lobbies, parking garages, or any place with overhead protection. So when faced with severe weather conditions, pit stop managers may also elect to cancel their local event based on their own judgment. Next slide. And the reason is, we have a pretty large region, and there could be inclement weather in one area and beautiful weather in another. So we don't want to send the message that bike commuting can't be done in the rain. Next slide, please. There will be an email invitation going out to all TPB members, and that will be coming from Conti to you, inviting you to participate in Bike to Work Day. So you can feel free to RSVP directly to the pit stop of your choice and contact the pit stop manager, and accommodations will be made, perhaps if you'd like to speak, by that pit stop manager. Next slide. We do have a Bike to Work Day website. The event registration started on March 1st, and we do maintain that website, and WABA assists us in handling the registration component. Next slide. We also have 2 official social media sites on Facebook and Twitter, and Bike to Work Day is also promoted on many other social media sites, such as Instagram and YouTube. But if you do have these social media sites, feel free to follow us on Twitter or Facebook. And if you do participate, feel free to share photos on either one of those. And we do have posters and rack cards, so we supply those to the pit stops and other entities, and the flyer is also available in Spanish. Next slide. We also have t-shirts, and this is really kind of an I did it trophy for those that are participating, and for the veterans. Many of them take pride in their collection of various Bike to Work Day t-shirts acquired over the years, and each year there's a new color introduced. This year's color will be green. Next slide. There are also banners that we've produced to promote the event, and many of these are hung near many of the pit stops just to let local residents know about the event. And they also serve as really nice backdrops for the event itself. Next slide. Thank you. And if you haven't registered for Bike to Work Day yet, look out for that email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And we are recommending approval of the proclamation today.
Thank you, Nick. So, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll need, I know one of the perks, I wanted to add, one of the perks of being TPB chair is being able to sign the proclamation. And this is a rendering of me signing the official proclamation for May 19th, 2023. So at this time, we'll need a motion, or actually this is by unanimous consent. So we'll start with any nays or abstentions to the unanimous consent. I'm hearing silence. And with that stated, it appears that Bike to Work Day for 2023 and the proclamation is approved. And I look forward to seeing you on the bike trail.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. One additional thing I'd like to just request is that if local jurisdictions can pass similar proclamations on their end, it would be greatly appreciated. And we also have very strong relationships with many of the jurisdictions who pour tons of hours into this event. So we just want to thank them for all of the work that they do to make this event happen each year.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
And the next item on the agenda is WMATA's request to amend the FY 2023-2026 TIP. This is a follow-up to a notice given last month. This action is to comprehensively amend the WMATA projects in the TPB's FY 2023, FY 2026 Transportation Improvement Program. I now recognize WMATA's representative, Allison Davis, to describe this request and make the motion to adopt Resolution R10-2023. After Allison's motion to adopt, please seek a second to the motion. Now that the motion has been made and properly seconded, we will move forward after that. So with that, Allison, could you please give your presentation?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Collins. I'm here today to seek an amendment to the FY 23-26 TIP, and that will help us align it with the Metro's budget and 6-year capital improvement program. The WMATA board adopted this last week on Friday, and so it's really well timed to move this forward. As Chair Collins noted, we had made notice of this at last month's board meeting. So hopefully if you have any questions, I'm willing to take them, but there were no public comments received and no changes have been made from what was shared last month. So with that, I make a motion to approve TPB Resolution R10-2023 to amend the FY 2023 to 2026 TIP.
Is there a second?
Second, tax current on its Arlington.
It's been moved and properly seconded. At this time, are there any questions for Ms. Davis? Any questions from the District of Columbia? Any questions from Maryland? From Virginia? Or other agencies present? We will now move for a vote, beginning with the nays or abstentions. Are there any nays or abstentions? Hearing to hear none, this vote does pass.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. The next item is Visualize 2050 updated schedule approval. And this is the last action item for the day. Last month, staff notified us of a proposal to provide additional time to have our member transportation agencies complete an updated mix of transportation projects with the financial plan for these projects for inclusion in our long-range transportation plan that is being called Visualize 2050. While many agencies can use this additional time, we heard that 2 of the largest projects in our current plan, WMATA and Maryland's Opportunity Express Lanes project, both have some substantive matters that they are yet to be resolved and need additional time. So I believe that it's very important that the projects that the TPB has sent back to the transportation agencies for re-examination and resubmission for inclusion be thoroughly reviewed and also supported by a viable financial plan. If providing this additional time will help us with it, and if we will not miss any federal guidelines, I am certainly in support of and recommend the board consider this proposal favorably. With that, I will ask Lynn Erickson to review what a revised schedule for Visualize 2050 would actually look like. There is no resolution to adopt. We're just approving the revised schedule that you have in your meeting packet. And Lynn?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Chair Collins. So before I get to this, I am super happy to introduce, I would like Christina Finch, our new staff member, to wave for a minute. I don't know if you all get to see her, but anyway, we were able to, I would say, snag a neighboring fellow MPO director. Christina comes to us from the Roanoke Transportation Planning Organization down south. She will be the lead for all things long-range transportation planning. And so we're happy to welcome Christina. And so this is the last, hopefully you will hear from me on some of these items directly. So I just wanted to get you to give her face with her name. So she'll be giving these presentations moving on into the future. So I know there she is. Wave at Christina. Okay, thank you. So anyway, we welcome Christina and you all get to know her very well. So anyway, I just digressed for a minute. I want to go back, Kim, to the presentation. And anyway, so we're going to talk about the schedule. If you go to the next slide for me, please. So again, as Chair Collins said, we're just asking, we'll be asking you all at the end of this presentation to approve the updated schedule. Our proposal is to kick it further down the road 6 months. In this schedule, the document and the materials you have before you, I've basically made 2 changes. One is just changing the dates, adding 6 months to the dates. The second change is originally we were planning on a different set of years for the tip, and reflecting on the timing of where we are in the middle of the year, we need to change the tip years. So we'll be shooting for an FY 2026 to 2029 tip. All the other activities are exactly the same. If you could go to the next slide, please, Kim. So quick recap on all the big major development tasks. Currently, you guys are all out there, so we approved the plan, the technical input solicitation in our process already. So everybody's we already dove right into updating the plan, doing all the things we need to do. For the constrained element tasks, these kind of are out the gate first. We're re-examining all the projects now through 6 months later, which will be December 29th. The financial plan revisions are extended as well, but people are still working on those right now because the first 2 things, you got to see what's in the plan. You got to know how much you have to work with in order to do number 3. Make sure all your submissions fit within that financial window. And again, those will be due December 29th. Everything else gets kicked back a few months. So public comment on the project inputs will now be from March 1st to March 30th next year. We're looking for board approval of those project inputs and the air quality scope of work in May 2024, and that'll kick off the air quality conformity analysis using the updated motor vehicle emissions budgets, which are also underway right now. Our tip inputs are going to be due January 26, 2025, and then the final board approval of all of this will be June 2025. So that's the 6 months out. Kim, you could go to the next slide, please. All right, so what's happening this year in particular? Like I mentioned, you've already approved the TIS. We're already moving forward. We had a really great facilitated listening sessions. Each of them were well attended, and you guys will be getting a summary from this in the next month. Meanwhile, all the things that we had talked about doing is underway. So all the agencies are reviewing and considering our synthesized policy framework. You're reviewing and considering our scenario finding summary, and all the things on that list in the TIS, those are still happening. You're examining using our zero-based budgeting approach. You're continuing to meet with board members, staff, and agency staff to discuss these potential inputs. None of that has changed. It's just moving out a little further. So in December 2023, all the member agencies have to enter all that data due December 29th. So that's our new big due date. Kim, if you could go to the next slide, please. So 2024 and beyond, just a quick recap. So we'll have 2 public comment periods as part of our plan update, and that's always what we do. The first one will now be March 1st through March 30th, 2024. And that board action, which will happen right after that, is to do 3 things. That board action is going to approve the air quality conformity scope of work. It's going to approve those project inputs, which are due in December. And it's going to approve the cooperative forecast for use in the analysis. So that's what's happening next May. And then a year after that, we'll be acting on all of it together after we review the final analysis and everything that goes into the plan. Next slide, please. All right, so today we're asking you to approve the attached schedule, and I am happy to take questions.
We'll start with any questions from the District of Columbia. Do we have any questions from the state of Maryland?
Looks like Mr. Conklin has a question. Mr. Bala.
Thank you, Lynn. You did a great job summarizing what the revised schedule would be. I was wondering if you could say a couple things about why the need for the revision.
Yeah, Chris, this is Kanti. Happy to do that. We discussed that at the last meeting. There is a memo as well. So a couple things. Of the 250 plus projects that are being re-examined, two of the largest projects, both in terms of financial costs as well as the impact on the infrastructure scope, are the express lanes or the opportunity lanes in Maryland and the metro. Those are the two single largest projects. We, in discussions with Maryland Department of Transportation, we understood that the revised scope for the express lanes, particularly after some recent developments with the previously selected private sector partner who was going to fund and help implement the project, pulling out, the commitment from the new governor to re-examine the scope and to decide the range and the scope of the project, as well as some recently enacted authorities that provided the General Assembly with the ability to reallocate or to make changes within the Maryland CTP. All of these things, we felt we were told that they could use some additional time to come up with the revised plan, scope, and everything for the Opportunity Lanes project beyond the current deadline of May through June. It's a single largest project. It was one of the most debated projects in the last update. So we wanted to ensure that the new administration and the new staff within the Maryland Department of Transportation had the additional time they needed.
Thank you.
The second reason is WMATA has clearly indicated that while their fiscal year 2024, they can make the operations work, they are facing a huge deficit for starting with fiscal year 2025 on an annual basis. Current estimate of their financial deficit is north of $750 million per year. The TPB requires a financially balanced plan. So in meeting with WMATA senior leadership, we were advised that they will need more time. They would not be able to provide us with a balanced operations plan by the current deadline. So those are the two primary reasons for providing this additional time.
It's a very good explanation. Appreciate it.
Do we have any additional questions from we're on Maryland?
Question.
Okay.
Thank you. It's more a clarification. I want to make sure that I understand when the public input is now scheduled. So as Kanti just explained very completely, the reason for doing this is because of changes in these two major projects. And so not having the slides in front of me, wanting to make sure that the public input on the project is all after everything is due.
No.
So there are several phases to
Several
this.
spots.
Right now,
Okay,
right
right.
now we have the rolling public comment period with our public comment forum, which we're sharing every month.
Right.
That's an addition. That's not
new.
what we've normally done. So that's an addition
Thank
to
you
make
for
sure that we're
reminding me.
providing the opportunity for that. The inputs are due at the end of December. It takes a good couple of months for staff to go back and forth. Just to give you an idea, there were 690 conformity records in the last plan update. So
Right.
it gives us a month for staff to review it all and then to kick it back in case if there are anything wrong. And then on March, so the TPB, the federal requirement for long range plan public comments, you only need one 30-day public comment period. We do not. We use 2. So we provide a public comment period at the beginning of the process, and our official, where we are officially asking for public comments on the project inputs, will be from March 1st to March 30th in 2024. Again, that was all that changed was when that comment period is instead of September.
Right, so that's just moved.
It's just moved to March. So
Time
now
to
that-
allow
and that
for
public-
comment on these two bigger projects that will change. Got it. Okay, that was, just wanted a clarification, a repeat of what you said there. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the state of Maryland? What about the state of Virginia?
And John Lynch from VDOT has his hands up.
Yes, thank you. John Lynch, Virginia Department of Transportation. We fully support Maryland and WMATA's efforts to, get their scope and financial aspects in line to make sure we have a viable plan. However, we do have some projects in process that may be impacted by the delay. So my question is there any opportunities to maintain the original December 2024 completion date?
Thank you. Thank you, John, for the question. So just to be clear, as I understand it, we've agreed that these two large projects and the agencies and the region, frankly, because it takes the region to work on the WMATA challenge, that we all need this additional time to come up with addressing the unresolved issues. So we are supportive of providing the 6 months. Can we provide the 6 months for project inputs, but still keep the end of the process deadline the same, which was December 2024? That is going to be extremely challenging for staff. The schedule that we had put together, we could squeeze in maybe 30 days by tightening the schedule a little bit. But getting 6 months more time, because we cannot start any of the analysis until the board approves all of the inputs. And if the inputs are not available to us through December of 2024, having just 12 months to do a complete update of the long-range transportation plan, which includes a brand new set of demographics. Next month, we plan to bring to the board new projections for the region's growth. The Council of Governments Board received that presentation earlier this month. That is going to be brand new. Developing new financial plan for all of the projects. Since we sent back every single project that was in the plan, we need to code all of them back into the network. And doing some additional years of analysis. Doing all of that in 12 months is going to be extremely challenging. So at this point, my honest assessment would be we will not be able to keep the December 2024 deadline. That is why we are proposing the commensurate 6-month extension. That said, we will try our best to try and finish the analysis earlier than June 2025. We will see how best if we can do some parallel processing and what best we can do. I can do that. But getting back to the Commonwealth of Virginia's issue, that there are a few projects that are time sensitive, that perhaps the Commonwealth was anticipating getting it into the plan by December of 2024. If there are just a handful of such time sensitive projects which will impact the project schedule or federal approval or securing funding, we would be able to consider amending the Visualize 2045. Not the Visualize 2050, that will continue on, but we can amend the plan that the board adopted last year, which will still require us to redo the emissions analysis and pass the federal emissions test, but it would not involve all of this additional detailed work. So that is something that staff would be able to accommodate, and I'll be happy to follow up with VDOT or any of the transportation agencies if there are any such time-sensitive projects.
All right, thank you very much, Conti.
Further questions from the state of Virginia? Finally, from WMATA. If there are no further questions, then we'll move for a vote.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the updated schedule. It's Bridget Newton, Rockville.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Russell, City of Frederick, second.
It's been moved and properly second. And with a motion to move forward and a second, are there any nays or abstentions? Appearing that there are none, the vote then passes. The next item on our agenda is approval of the FY 2024 TLC Technical Assistance Recipients. This is the last action item for today's meeting. To introduce the item, Deb Billick, Director of ULI Washington, is going to say a few words. Deb chaired this year's TLC selection panel. Following Deb, we'll have John Swanson of TPB staff present recommendations of the selection committee of the local transportation agency applications that are being recommended for technical assistance grants under the TPB's Transportation Land Use Connection Program. This program has provided support to local jurisdictions as they deal with the challenges of integrating land use and transportation planning at the community level since 2006. Mr. John Swanson, if you could begin the presentation.
Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Deb to get us started.
Oh, okay.
Thanks,
Hi,
Deb.
everyone. Sure. Just thumbs up if you can hear me, so I know that I'm communicating well. Okay. Hi. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Deb Billick. I'm the Executive Director of ULI Washington. And I want to acknowledge that for a very long time, I was staff to the Transportation Planning Board 10 years ago for about 5 years. And so it's a real pleasure to come back in front of you all and have this conversation, because this is a program that's near and dear to my heart in more ways than one. I was pleased to serve as the chair of the selection panel for this year's set of TLC applications. The TPB received a slate of great applications, and we're recommending 10 of them for funding. In a few minutes, you'll be asked to approve them, and John will give some more details about that. But just a bit about the range of projects so you have a sense of what you're looking at. Since 2007, TLC, the Transportation Land Use Connections Program, has funded more than 160 projects throughout the region that build local capacity and support innovation in all corners of our great region. This year, we're recommending a diverse array of projects. Many of them will do the important work that this program is known for: multimodal corridor plans, trail designs, bus stop access studies, and other similar things. But I also want to note that some of the projects we're recommending directly respond to the challenges of this unique moment, including planning for a post-pandemic future and promoting green infrastructure to make communities more resilient to the effects of climate change. And I'll say, as a committee, we were really pleased to see applications that were responsive to this moment, because it shows a real sense around the region of how catalytic this project and this program can be. I'll share that as ULI Washington's executive director, I see a lot of synergies between this program and between the work that I do at ULI. I think so often the advances that we make in infrastructure and the advances that we make in land use sometimes default into siloed thinking, but it's programs like this that really integrate these things, which make for better places to live and work and play and shop, which I know is something we all deeply care about. So it was a real pleasure to have part of this again this year, and I thank John for asking me. Over the years, we've seen that little projects like these, and these are little projects, can make a really big difference because they establish good planning and design foundations for capital improvements. So with that, what I'd love to do is turn it over to John, who will tell you a little bit more about this year's recommendations. And thank you all very much again for providing funding and for your support. I think this is a really great program.
Wow, Deb, thank you. That's great. Thanks for that setup, and thank you for your support and for the support of ULI over the years. It's been tremendously important to us, and this program really is built on partnerships, not just with our members, but with organizations like yours. So, Kim, if we could bring up the slide presentation. There we go. So just some quick background. The TLC program has been around for more than 15 years, and we funded, actually with these projects, it's going to be 177 projects, and with the intention really of supporting our priorities as a regional planning organization to build vibrant, walkable communities. And we know that doing that work at the community level helps to build a stronger region and improves mobility and accessibility region-wide. So these are little local projects, but it is a regional program. What do? We fund small planning studies and design projects, and we use consultants to do that. The projects usually turn around very quickly, and about 8 months typically, and it follows a very simple model, which has been replicated by some of our newer TPB programs, including the Regional Roadway Safety Program and the Transit Within Reach program. So next slide. This year, we had a 2-month solicitation. We received 16 projects. 8 of them were from Virginia, 8 were from Maryland. New this year, we increased the funding availability to $80,000 per project, which is, again, not a lot of money, but it was some increase from last year. And we also coordinated the application process with our sister program, the Regional Roadway Safety Program, which operates again on the same model, but focus more explicitly on safety projects. So next slide. Selection process. I won't get into the details here, but I'll just say we have a diverse panel. Deb chaired this group. We had a couple of really fun and interesting meetings where we really discussed these applications in great detail. It wasn't I don't think it was an easy decision, but I'm really pleased with the outcome. We tried to keep the process rigorous and fair, but we also really want to be responsive to our members. Next slide. So we're recommending 10 projects, as Deb mentioned, and they hit a lot of our regional priorities. Almost all of them serve a lot of these key sort of geographic interests that we have: activity centers, equity emphasis areas, access to transit through the high capacity transit station locations and the transit access focus areas, and also supporting connections to and completion of the National Capital Trail Network. So these are a really great array of projects in that they serve our regional priorities very directly. Next slide. Here's a list of the projects, and not only do they serve our regional priorities, but they also really sort of build upon a lot of our the subjects that are sort of so important to our members: safe routes to schools, trails, various fundamental access challenges. And we're also really pleased this year that some of our smaller jurisdictions are getting funding. We have different funding availability between the states, so that's something that's just been a reality of this program for a while. So we do have more funding available for Maryland projects than Virginia projects. Next slide. You can see that we got a nice geographic spread here: outer jurisdictions, inner jurisdictions, and again, serving a variety of different needs. And we were just talking earlier about the long-range plan. A lot of these projects really are building upon projects in the long-range plan, projects that the TPB would like to be funding. And, for example, we're going to be funding a Yorkshire corridor project, is really building on a big $100 million project in Virginia, but making that project, a good project, even better. So moving on, I'm going to try to breeze through these projects. Next slide, please. So the South Pickett Street Corridor Improvement Study. This is a really basic, super solid application, and really sort of punches a lot of our buttons. It's an area that's experiencing a lot of change, not very ped and bike friendly. And this project is going to produce conceptual designs for bike lanes, crosswalks, enhancements to crosswalks, medians, flashing beacons, etc. So a really solid, great project. Next slide. Here's a project that really also punches a lot of our buttons. It's looking at a bike ped connection in Falls Church between the W&OD Trail and the West Falls Church Metro Station. Again, and you've heard us talk many times about the National Capital Trail Network and access to transit as key priorities of this board, particularly when it comes to active transportation. And this project is going to be doing a study that's going to going to be identifying a connection to do both of those things. Next slide. I already mentioned this project. Yorkshire Corridor is a regional activity center, equity emphasis area. It's got a large immigrant population. A lot of people are using transit out there, and yet it's extremely pedestrian unfriendly, kind of to say the least. VDOT has identified over $100 million in federal and regional funding for investment there, and this project is going to be building upon that work and presenting that work really presents an opportunity to implement additional improvements to create more walkable transit-oriented corridor. So looking at things like bus pull-off areas, bus shelters, and ped bike facilities. It also requires close coordination with Manassas Park, as well as OmniRide. So we really like to, with these projects, be bringing folks like that together. So really pleased about this one. Next slide. Here's another, I think, really cool project looking at green infrastructure in an outer jurisdiction. And it's really, we're excited to see that Prince William is interested in pursuing this. It's going to be identifying green infrastructure alternatives and making sure that this kind of infrastructure, when infrastructure is constructed, that it's in alignment with locally adopted goals for sustainability, resiliency, and climate change mitigation. They're going to be looking at things like permeable surfaces, rain gardens, landscaping. The study is going to be coordinated with the process of revising the county's construction standards manual. So we like to see a sort of direct link to implementation. And it may include case studies for how it will be applied in Prince William, but also has, I think, some real regional applicability. Next slide. In the city of Frederick, I see Alderman Russell up there. Hi, this is a really cool project. It's actually incorporating freight, which we don't often get in these projects, but you know, we talk about sort of auto-oriented dependent. This was horse and buggy oriented development out there, and this is a super old street and has been an industrial strip in the city of Frederick, but the city wants to see how to make it more walkable and bikeable, basically accommodate industry as well as making the infrastructure more pedestrian friendly. So this project is building on a study we funded 2 years ago, and this is going to be actually developing design to implement very specific improvements for sidewalks and bikeways and crossings. Next slide. Safe Routes to School. This is a staple of this program. This is going to be looking at 3 sample schools and developing a prioritized list of needs and developing also methodology that can be applied throughout the city of Gaithersburg. Next slide. In Rockville, we're going to be funding a complete streets feasibility study for Manakee Street. It's going to be looking at ped bike transit facilities that could be added to this road, projects within an equity emphasis area and a regional activity center. And it was a very solid application. Next slide. In Tacoma Park, this is building on sort of this post-COVID world that we are living in. This study is going to be analyzing the potential impact for full closure of Laurel Avenue in Tacoma Park, developing a comprehensive understanding of the traffic impacts of reorienting the road use out there, including potential roadway redesigns, intersection changes, signage, and traffic patterns. It's going to obviously require close coordination with DDOT. It's right on the border there. And it really is very exciting to be looking at sort of post-pandemic opportunities. So this is a cool project. Next slide. Another post-COVID planning study. This has actually got it in the name. Flex was launched in 2019, but it was in operation for less than a year. It's a microtransit demand responsive system. Since restarting last year in July, I think, in July 2022, the service has been grappling with post-pandemic kind of, challenges. And this study is going to be reevaluating travel behaviors and conditions, and I'm trying to reimagine Flex for the future. It's going to be building on a study that we funded a few years ago, and it's going to be integrated with, so the timing is great here with the Better Bus study, which you just talked about a couple hours ago, as well as the Ride On Reimagine study, which has gotten a lot of attention, is very important for county-wide assessment of transit in Montgomery County. Next slide. In Prince George's County, also looking at transit. This is a very practical approach to thinking about bus stop improvements. This is going to be developing a framework for making decisions for quick build bus stop improvements, things like curb extensions, ADA treatments, shelter placements, lighting, and drainage enhancements. It's going to be developing a prioritization tool and a checklist that can be used in the future. So that is it. Next slide, please. Those are our projects. We're super excited about them. Once approved, we'll get started. This program is very nimble. We try to keep the procurement as simple as possible so that the projects are really ready to get started in September. So I just want to take the moment to make a couple of random points. The Regional Roadway Safety Program is a program that's, again, similar to TLC. We solicited our applications for that program in coordination with TLC, and the approval for those projects is going to be next month. We will begin the solicitation for our Transit Within Reach program, which is a sort of a second sister, maybe a younger sister to TLC. Transit Within Reach funds design projects for projects that really specifically focus on ped bike improvements, ped bike access to transit. And finally, Conti already mentioned this, but I'll say it again. Tomorrow we're going to be having, I think, a really fun, interesting webinar where we're going to be featuring projects from 2022 from the TLC and roadway safety program, as well as one Transit Within Reach program. So anyone's welcome to join. It's going to be an hour long. Each of the presentations is going to be limited to about 6 minutes. So keeping people really on time and keeping the storytelling kind of moving along. So welcome to anyone who wants to join that session. So with that, we're seeking your approval of the 10 projects that I described earlier. Thank you.
Starting and looking from the District of Columbia, are there any questions for Mr. Swanson or from Deb?
Yeah.
From the state of Maryland? From Virginia? And from WMATA? Okay.
Julia has a question. Julia has
Okay.
Just a minute. This is not actually a question. I just, the TLC program is very near to my heart, and I just wanted to commend both the selection group and the staff for working on it, and to all of the jurisdictions for thoughtfully advancing this really great group of projects. The TLC program is something that I hope we are all so proud of, because it's really a program that punches way above its weight. And I think it does this great job of both driving innovation and also building capacity across our region to achieve the broader goals that we're all aspiring to. So I just wanted to commend all of you for your great work on this, and I'm looking forward to possibly attending this great webinar tomorrow. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Julia is sort of our TLC godmother. So thanks for all your support over the years. I also should thank our staff, Justine Yvonne and Janie Nam, who really great. It's a real team effort. So thanks.
Any further questions? So if there aren't any further questions, I need to move for a vote. Do we have a motion to approve the FY 2024 technical assistant recipients?
John Lynch with Virginia Department. Go ahead, David.
Snyder moves approval of the projects.
Yes. And do we have a second?
John Lynch, second.
It's been moved and properly second. So with that, are there any nays or abstentions? Appears that there are none. So with that stated, the vote does pass. Okay. The next item on the agenda is coordinated human resource Human Services Transportation Plan update. And Sergio Ritaco from staff will give this presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, members of the board. Supporting volunteer driver programs and door-to-door escorted transportation services, funding wheelchair accessible vans and taxis, and increasing access to transit stations for older adults and people with disabilities. These are all the types of projects that the TPB's Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan looks to prioritize in supporting the accessibility and mobility needs of older adults, people with disabilities, and individuals who identify as low income through the Section 5310 Enhanced Mobility Grant Program. Today's item introduces and reviews the key elements of the latest update to the coordinated plan for your consideration and approval next month. Well, we also take this opportunity to provide information to you on what this program is and how the TPB administers this vital program for COG and our region. MAP 21 Funding Authorization Bill established the Section 5310 Enhanced Mobility Program with the primary objective of meeting the transportation needs of older adults and people with disabilities when the transportation service provided is unavailable, insufficient, or inappropriate to meeting those needs. And since a designated recipient was required for funds to be administered to our region, in 2013, the Governor of Maryland, the Governor of Virginia, and the Mayor of the District of Columbia named the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments as such, the designated recipient of these funds, with the TPB as its administrative agent. The Transportation Planning Board's role in this program is to prioritize, select, and implement projects for the program on every 2 years. The more recent Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act significantly increased the apportionment of this perennially overprescribed program for this region, as well as for the nation as a whole. We're now at approximately $5 million per year in matching grants. Applicants are not just local government agencies, be it in the transportation sector or in the human services sector. They can also include nonprofits, transit agencies, and private providers of transportation like taxis and Uber and Lyfts of the world. It is a competitive grant program, which requires matching funds at the time of applying. 20% requirement for capital or expenditures considered mobility management, and 50% for operating fund requests. So what is the coordinated plan? Simply, it's the document we must have per federal requirements and update every 4 years that guides the Enhanced Mobility Grant Program. It's not updated in isolation just by staff and must include the input and guidance from the TPB's Access for All Advisory Committee and the impacted population groups, older adults, people with disabilities, and individuals who identify as low income, which we conduct and do through our TPB's Access for All Advisory Committee. And so you might be curious why we use the term coordination. So as noted earlier, it's all kinds of entities that can apply for funding in this program and even support these very important population groups for our region, nonprofits, transit agencies, local governments, and private providers, to support the needs of their mobility and accessibility. And really any attempt to improve coordination amongst these various organizations and the different roles that they have within this region maximizes the use of these limited funds. Greater efficiency, less duplication of services, and more extensive services across the region, just to name a few. And so the plan itself uses a structure to identify what unmet needs exist in this region and report on the strategies and projects best suited to meet those needs through this coordinated effort. And we'll take a moment to walk through each one of these in the following slides. As an example of how it's structured and how it works, goes through, first and foremost, that we, in our coordination with the TPB Access for All Advisory Committee, identified lack of assisted transportation as an unmet transportation need in this region. And a strategy for improving service and coordination, as identified through our process, is to provide customer-oriented, tailored transportation for these population groups, and a priority project that would help meet that need would be volunteer driver programs for this region. So that's pretty much an example of sort of how the document itself is structured. And so to walk through each one of these sections, the unmet needs, it can be broken down and fall under 4 A's: availability, affordability, awareness, and accessibility. Availability can mean fragmented services, not getting to certain parts of the region, or not being able to get to certain parts of the region through the programs and services for these population groups, and generally just more service for the region. Affordability aims and reinforces the needs of low-income individuals or those that are on tighter budgets. And moving on to awareness, lack of awareness is another A. Sometimes it's just a matter of not knowing services exist because of communication or need for improving interjurisdictional coordination. And finally, accessibility needs aim to consider the existing infrastructure isn't always optimal for people with disabilities or older adults. So with the unmet needs established, we look to take stock of what's currently out there in our region. The TPB's Reach a Right database looks to provide individuals with a one-stop shop for all the services that are available based on your geographic location. And the TPB's Access for All Advisory Committee members had the opportunity to review this information. Many of them are experts or well clued into the different types of services within this region, and they were able to review and provide and ensure the accuracy of the information that's included as part of this database. So we've established the unmet needs. We've taken a look at the inventory of existing services that exist within this region. Now to document the strategies aimed at improving regional services and coordination. Simply, these are: expand availability and coordination of transportation options, increase awareness of existing transportation services, improve accessibility of transportation options across the region, and make transportation options more affordable and sustainable. And the priority projects to implement those strategies include those mentioned at the beginning, as well as mobility management, coordinated planning efforts, travel training, increased access to transit stations, that first mile, last mile connections, and tailored transportation services for clients of human service agencies, what is better known as traditional vehicle acquisition of wheelchair accessible vans, minivans, vans, and buses. And I do want to be clear is that applicants can propose other eligible projects that don't fall within these priority projects as part of the solicitation period. And the selection process of the type of projects that ultimately end up selected is dependent on the types of applications we receive through the solicitation period. Finally, it is a competitive federal grant program with all the strings that come attached with those federal dollars. So not only do applicants need to consider the criteria established in this coordinated plan, but also have the institutional capacity to manage it and administer a federal grant and be feasible to implement the project within the grant period that is approximately 2 to 3 years. And with that, the draft plan that was included as part of your mail-out materials is also currently in the middle of a public comment period, which is scheduled to wrap up on May 13th. And we will, after, of course, today's introduction, look to request approval of the updated coordinated plan at our next meeting, all in preparation for our next solicitation period for the Enhanced Mobility Program slated for the summer of 2023. And with that, concludes my formal comments, Mr. Chair, and happy to support any questions and comments that the board may have.
Thank you, Sergio. Do we have any questions starting with the District of Columbia? Do we have any questions from the state of Maryland? The state of Virginia? Finally, from WMATA and other agencies. Doesn't appear that there are any questions, so thank you, Sergio.
Great, thanks so much.
Mr. Collins, this is Kanti. Not a question, but I would like to note that this is part 1 of the Enhanced Mobility Program for this calendar year. So when the solicitation happens for the enhanced mobility grant funds this year, because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the funding available has doubled. So the TPB will be in a position to award up to $10 million in projects that will be providing services to older adults and people with disabilities. It's a significant amount of funding that would be available for nonprofits and other organizations who provide such service.
It's great. It's great news. And again, thank you. So the last item on today's agenda is the WMATA Better Bus Work Session recap. I mentioned the Better Bus Work Session earlier this morning. Eric Randall on staff will provide a report on the session and also talk to staff and about plans related to this.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'll be recapping this morning's work session briefly. I'm placing the link for the web page for that work session this morning in the chat. It is available on our TPB webpage with the 3 presentations that were given. And the meeting was also broadcast this morning on the YouTube station that we're all being rebroadcast on right now. So after this afternoon's meeting is wrapped up, people could go back and listen to this morning's work session if you're interested. There's also a memo posted under the materials for today's meeting. Again, to recap some history, Metro staff led by Allison Davis, who may well chime in here shortly, came to the TPB at our November 2022 meeting and presented on Better Bus, which is Metro's greater effort to reinvigorate Metro bus and bus service across the region, including their network restructuring, which has been in the news the past few days. They've just announced their 50 public events for 50 days, which started Monday, and they have a special kickoff happening this Friday. We had this work session this morning to follow up on that November 2022 board meeting to provide more opportunity for members to ask questions and to follow up with specific elements of the Better Bus effort. And so I'm just going to show a few slides from this morning. We had an opening by TPB staff. Then we had Alan Fye, Director of Policy Programs at Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, speak about what NVTC is doing in Northern Virginia. And then Metro staff led discussion on 3 key topics. And again, there were slides on each of these. The 3 key topics we discussed were bus prioritization, making buses faster, bus stop and station improvements, making bus service more attractive, higher quality, safer for everyone, and finally, zero emissions buses, the transition to a zero emissions fleet. And I just want to stop and say this morning, we talked specifically about how these relate to our climate goals. Climate goals are getting a lot of attention at our board meetings and in the work we're doing as TPB staff. Speeding up the buses, bus priority, and transitioning to zero emission buses are 2 of the key strategies. If we want to have any hope of meeting our aspirational climate goals, speeding up the buses and moving to zero emissions buses are critical to achieving those goals. And so we talked a lot about this. Again, we talked about these 3 topics. So next slide, please. So at the end of each of the 3 discussion sessions, the Metro staff talked about what can TPB and the TPB members do. So for the first topic, speeding up buses, we talked about bus priority and bus rapid transit in the region. And really it was about installing dedicated bus lanes, reserving space for buses, painting those lanes red, enforcing those lanes. And when we look at person movement, looking not just at how many vehicles are getting through a corridor or an intersection, but how we move people through those intersections. And if more people are riding the bus, it's ever more important to provide priority for the bus. TPB has long supported efforts towards bus priority. We had the Tiger Grant from 2010 to 2016. We also have had a number of publications on bus priority, including one on treatments or measures for bus priority, the infrastructure, and one more recently on bus lane enforcement. And links to those can be found in the materials that were posted for this morning's work session. Again, It's up to the roadway owners, jurisdictions, or state highway administrations that own that right-of-way to help implement these measures to make buses, whether they be Metrobus or Ride-On or any other buses, fast, quick, and a competitive form of transportation. Next slide, please. So our second item was on bus stops, accessibility, and customer amenities, making sure that everybody who needs them of all ability can get to those bus stops, and that making them nice, safe, secure, well-lighted, comfortable places to stop. So, you know, it's important to note that Metro owns very few bus stops. Most bus stops are owned by the jurisdiction or by the right-of-way owner, whether it be a highway administration or other agency. Again, Metro does not own many of their bus stops. So how to bring all of these up to a common level of standards, again, context sensitive in terms of their location and how many people they serve, is a topic of conversation. Metro, Maryland, Virginia all have different sets of standards or are re-examining their standards for bus stops. We had a lot of discussion about how can we get bus stops or stations improved, particularly when it comes to private property. And several members noted that collaborative action, collective action, you know, not just the transit operator, but also the highway owner, the city, the county coming to a landowner and saying, we need a bus stop here. We want it to be like this. And we need your participation is critical to getting these bus stop standards implemented. Again, a lot of systems do have service guidelines. One topic raised this morning was whether we should get together and sort of both organize a compendium of all these guidelines, or whether there's any value in trying to put a more regional approach together for bus stop guidelines. And then last slide. On the third topic, again, we're talking about the transition to zero-emission buses, whether they be battery electric or particularly Ride-On is in the process of getting some hydrogen fuel cell buses. There's already been several collective efforts on this, both at the state level, at the regional level, including by NVTC, and Metro and many other bus agencies are also participating in a regional coordination group on zero emissions buses. But the talk is about how do we collectively address our needs for infrastructure, working with the utilities, making sure we can get a reliable service at a competitive price from the utilities, making sure our workforce is trained, and establishing protocols for us to share when buses of different agencies pull up at a common site, whether it be a metro station or a place like Sherwington Bus Garage. Are there charges there? What would be the processes, the policies, the infrastructures that we can share and collaborate on-road charging? Because again, moving to the zero emissions buses is going to be critical to achieving our climate goals. So that's the recap. I think the big takeaway for all the staff that were participating this morning, TPB, NVTC, Metro, is that there were some really good questions from board members. We'll put together some information to address some of those questions in more detail with references or with some options, and probably put those together in a memorandum that we could distribute ideally next month. Otherwise, I'll open the floor to Conti or to Allison Davis if you all have any comments about this morning's board session. Thank you.
Do you want to go first?
No, why don't you, Allison?
All right. So yes, so thank you for that great summary, Eric, and appreciate everyone's time this morning to talk more about how we make buses better. Right, it is really a jointly owned initiative, right? And it is really critical for how we move people around this region. I think, you know, there isn't a ton of new rail coming in the short term. So it's really, bus is our best way to really get people out of their cars, moving between where they need to go when they want to travel. And so all of us really have a key role in making that happen. So really appreciate it. Happy to answer any questions, or if you want to email me afterwards with any information that you need, let me know. But again, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alison. Eric, I agree. That was an excellent summary. Just for board members' information, staff has already budgeted some funding for a couple of studies that the TPB can undertake that would benefit all of the members who are interested in working towards a better bus. The details of those studies will be developed as we begin to work with the local bus operators. One of them would be around the transitioning to cleaner buses, clean fuel buses would be one of the studies. There was an interest expressed, as Eric noted, about bus stop standards, but as we understand, many of the localities already have these standards. So there's an opportunity here to first compile all of them to see what is common and see if it makes sense to develop a regional standards, if that would even be possible. That is another thing that staff would be looking at to see if we can make those resources available. So, thanks.
I guess, I mean, before we adjourned, I don't know if there were any questions coming from the different jurisdictions and from WMATA, or any questions on the Better Bus work session and that report. Right? Looks like it's 1:50, and that concludes all of our items for today's meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for May the 17th, 2023. And with that stated, we are now adjourned, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon and evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're not sure if it'll be virtual or in person. You have to stay tuned for that. I'll make sure you guys know once we decide.
Okay.
About that.
I did not. I just assumed that people would be like, what's happening next month? It's because I know you that well, Heather.
There you go. All right. Have a good
Thank you.
one, guys.
Bye,
Take
everyone.
care. Thanks.
Hi,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, Kim.